We need to be able to have conversations without feeling like we're going to say something that gets us thrown in jail because people happen to be offended.
Skepticism. Do you know what you believe?
All right, folks, we are live with another Pangburn Hangout. It's Thursday. Normally, we would be expecting Eliyahu to be running the conversation, but he's taken a time out. Dalsu is now going to be running our Thursday conversation. And just adjusting my mic a little bit. Yeah, so that's going to be the format for now. And we do have, I will announce now, we do have someone new starting a conversation on Sundays. And I will be giving you guys more information. This conversation, or the conversations on Sundays will be ran by someone by the name of Scientific Best. I don't think that's his legal name, but who knows? But he will now be running a conversation on Sundays, and I think we're calling it the Conscious Ape, that conversation. So it will have kind of a hard science theme to it, but I'm sure just like all of our other weekly conversations, we will be getting into some topics that aren't necessarily in the realm of hard science. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I'm really excited for that. Dalsu, how's it going, man? Doing good. I'm feeling a little bit tired today. I had my Pfizer shot 2 days. Well, I had it on Tuesday. Feeling a little bit groggy today, but not much, man. Like, I haven't really felt these side effects like people are talking about, like being like bedridden and sore joints and things like that. I've been lucky not to have that. Oh yeah. The lightest, it's lighter than Johnson and Johnson. Johnson and Johnson. God, I love that. When me and my brother were having beer last week, and he pointed that out to me, like how Trump says that, and fuck, did that make me laugh. So, does nothing, capital M and nothing, exist? Interesting. Me too, and I'm not going to poison the conversation with my input quite yet. I'll pop in a little bit later, but I do want to listen. I'm excited to hear how people interpret this.
So where there are no things, there is nothing. So where might there be no things?
Between things, around things.
And so you would pretty confidently state that there are no things between things and around things?
Well, there could be things between things, but then you can always just go between those things.
But so far, don't we just find like more things in between those things?
Yeah, but those things usually aren't touching.
So we go between those things. Yeah. All right. So it's kind of a loop, but yeah, you would say nothing is the space between the things, and then when we find more things, it would just be okay. Yeah, the next space between those things. Somewhere in there, there's nothing.
Yeah, or you don't have to go downwards, you can go upwards as well. You can say surrounding the things, so you can go a step up.
Yeah, and then we could do this in reverse, where it's like, all right, so around all the things, wouldn't that also be a thing? If
Around all the things would be nothing.
but then wouldn't like if nothing exists, wouldn't it then be a thing?
No, because we defined it as the absence of things.
Why isn't space a thing? When you say around, so what do you mean by around? You mean sphere? Do you mean space? Like, what do we mean by space?
So imagine a something, and it's
Mhm.
just floating, and around that something is nothing.
Where do we find that? In
Where do
between
we find
things.
that?
But
Well, I mean, it depends on how technical you want to get, but I suppose you could say an entity just floating around in space, immediately surrounding that entity, you could say there's nothing. Unless space is made up of particles, then it depends if. I'll be honest, like I don't want to. I don't want to go into that question. That's too complicated. There's too many what ifs to really answer that. There's just so many because yeah, there's loads of unknowns to go
Isn't
down.
it?
Sorry, I'm repeating myself now.
Isn't it? I'm no physicist. I really don't know much. But isn't it obvious that space is a thing? Isn't that established, or am I wrong?
What do you mean, like
Like
the
space
void of
itself.
space? Yes.
Yeah, like space.
Well,
I would say that it's a
It's
place. I wouldn't say that it's a thing.
every bit of space that you point to is energy.
Maybe we should define thing, and energy is a new word. So maybe is energy separate from a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh wait, sorry. No, energy is a thing. Yeah, energy is not nothing.
So the question is,
I
does
don't
nothing
think energy is a
exist?
thing.
Yeah, does nothing exist?
I'm saying
Can I-
nothing
can I
does
answer
not.
that?
Sorry, nothing does exist.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go down the room and see what the answer is.
Yeah, let's get to the next one. So yeah, let's go Grim, and then we'll do Dr. Doolittle.
Oh, okay. My room looks different than your guys' room. Nothing is an imaginative word, so abstractly, yes. But if you were to try to define it or point to it or give it any type of distinction in the physical world, no, it's just an imaginative term. It's an abstract thought, as nothing to do with reality. It's just abstract. It's like
So
it's
so would you
abstract.
say nothing doesn't exist?
As an abstract term, it does. As a physical construct of reality or whatever you may like want to point to it or say where it is or blah 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 blah. Like if I forgot the opposite term of abstract is
Concrete?
concrete. Yeah. No, it can't by definition.
All right. Dr. Doolittle, does nothing exist?
Yeah, I'm gonna say nothing does not exist.
All right.
I think that's an a priori statement because to exist it has to have a corporeal manifestation in the objective world, and for my definition of exist. And so the lack of manifesting is non-existence. It's not existence. But that's sort of a semantic argument, I think. But the question about free space and whether that's a thing or not a thing or a place, that's kind of an interesting question to me, because free space with, let's just say, the vacuum of space, which is the part in between particles that we can measure, still has properties. So can we say something has measurable properties yet does not exist? That makes me want to go the other way and say nothing does exist.
But that's like the equivalent. That's like the equivalent of like of course it exists. Yeah, where is it? Well, I'm not gonna fucking tell you.
Well, no. Semantically we define existing as, having to. There has to be something there for it to say that it exists, right?
I know, but you could like.
But even free space in a vacuum has a temperature and a dielectric constant and properties like the speed of light is a certain speed through it, and it has all kinds of properties that we can measure. So can we say that it doesn't exist? Maybe free space doesn't rise to the level of being a thing, and therefore we can say it doesn't exist even though we measure it.
Yeah. And then at this point, we would have to be like, all right, what do we mean by thing in this instance? And
it's connected.
Yeah, and does a place count as a thing? So there's just a measurement of where you are in space. Like, does that count as a thing?
Can I say one thing?
Sure. Nivik, does nothing exist?
I think I understand where you're going. It's kind of like all is connected, and depending on how you perceive it, it's a thing. So it's like you're looking at there's space between everything, but you could count all that's there that's between. It's kind of like you say, well, there's space between this, but this would be a solar system, and there's you could always go down. You know what I mean? And there'll be space. There's always space between something. So it's kind of like nothing is between something, but the things around it counts as a thing.
Yeah. So do you think you would say nothing exists or doesn't exist?
I can't say it. I'm not really sure.
Cool. I'm gonna say if nothing doesn't exist, wouldn't that mean that it does exist? Because if nothing is the lack of existence and there is no lack of existence, so it doesn't exist, then nothing does exist as the non-existent thing.
Can I say gravity kind of connects things?
It's equivalent to infinity. Infinity is an imaginative term, right? But it doesn't truly exist. Like if I said, hey, you can take an infinite step, right? So if I said, hey, Dalsu, go walk to that wall, it's 10 steps away. But every time you take a step, I want you to take half a step than you previously did. Then you would be stuck on an infinite loop, right? And then you would say, well, look, infinity exists. And it's like, well, no, infinity is still just a concept, right? It's still abstract, right? The act of what you're doing is completely differently in how we define it and so on and so on. So nothing, right, is an abstract concept. The moment you bring it out of the abstract, it doesn't become the thing you're trying to describe. It's something completely different.
So I have another thought on what you said. You're saying that since if nothing exists, no, if we don't know of any existence of nothing, or we're going to say that nothing doesn't exist, then it exists because that's a nothing, and obviously that nothing exists. But in order to say that, like, you have to first define what existence means, and then you can play the same game with the word existence. I don't know about the same game, but you just first have to define what you mean by exist.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that because existence and non-existence is essentially the same discussion as nothing and something.
Right. So you're only, I don't know how to explain this well, but you're taking one half of the nothing and you're using the nothing part, and then you're not going to the existence part. You understand what I'm saying? So you're assuming that nothing exists because there's no example of nothingness, right? But then what do you mean? You have to just explain what you mean by that nothing exists. So what do you mean by the exist part?
Yeah, I'd pretty much agree that saying nothing exists is like saying nothing is something, or like saying something. Because I think you can do it in reverse too. It's just harder to go that way, to say something is nothing, and then you kind of get into ontological nihilism.
Well, there's also the important question, which is kind of different. Is it possible for nothing to exist? Instead of does nothing exist, is it possible for nothing to exist? Like if you imagine a all-powerful being, like the possibility of a creator or some kind, could they possibly have the power to turn back the causal chain of time and retract and delete everything up into the singularity that created that closed system, and then delete the closed system as well? And would you call that nothing?
Then if it exists, then it would be something, wouldn't it? So we first have to differentiate between what we mean by nothing versus something, and existence versus non-existence. Because to me, they're the same thing. The opposite of nothing is something, and something exists, and something that is not something does not exist. Because if it was something, that means it exists, and something that exists is something. So whether it's a physical entity, a spiritual entity. So what's the differentiation between existence and somethingness?
Your something is also abstract. So when you say something, right, that's once again, that's an imaginative term, that's an abstract term. If you want to define that something, right, in reality, we can point to it and actually go about like looking at it, testing at it, and say, okay, cool, this thing exists. If you use something and nothing as kind of antithesis, nature is what you're doing, then who's to say the universe is like that first off, and it's all presupposition.
There's space between, and there's always space between something. But if you count those two things together, you count it as something. I mean, like, no matter how much you shrink down or you expand out, you can expand out to space, and all those things are connected to each other would be a solar system. And that is viewed as something, and you can shrink down, and they're down to molecules, and
Yeah, we don't quite know exactly what it is on the Planck scale, but what we do know is that there's a thing called entropy that happens with our world, and so what we see in those spaces is basically energy that has slowed down so slow that it's just sitting there, and we're trying to see exactly what it's made of. I got a phone call. Bear back.
It's like you shrink down to a neutron, the protons and neutrons that are between it's almost just like it's just a perspective, and things are connected, but they're not connected, depending on how you view it. in how they're relative to each other.
I got one. I
Got a little distracted there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that point. Can I try to see if I'm
yeah.
phrasing it right?
How
with what
old
Nivek's
were you
trying
when
to
you
say?
last got
If
in
you
a fight?
have two
When I
objects
last got in a
that's
fight,
a good-
actually,
and you define those two objects as one,
That's a thing.
as a unity, then that thing is a thing.
You identify it as a thing.
The two of them, and so the space in between them is actually part of the thing.
They're
And
connected.
so there can't be nothing because it's actually just a matter of how you frame a thing. So if you see the whole universe as one, like you have like a pantheist view of the whole universe being one,
Or a
then you
galaxy.
could by definition say there is no nothing because everything because it's all one thing.
You expand out.
Nivek,
You have
you
a
s-
galaxy. You expand in.
So you
can
just
go
blew
down
up
to
you just
neutron.
blew up the whole conversation.
Yeah, you took my thing. That's where I was gonna go, Nivek. No, I'm
sorry.
kidding. No, I wrote down this. That's actually really cool. That it went there. I kind of missed it. I wrote down this some of the like types of nothing. I think is what he calls it. He might be a philosopher or a scientist. I'm not sure. His name is Robert Lawrence Kuhn, I think. And he basically has like I think he had 9 types of nothing, and it kind of starts with the not ascribing thinginess, which is probably my favorite kind of nothing, where you just don't like if you don't have the ability to conceive of things, then technically you would experience nothing, right? Like if you had no self, no other, that would technically, like, you would kind of not exist, but that would be nothing in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, I think not ascribing thinginess to something is that's a different classic. No, it's not. It's like a shadow, right? Is a shadow a thing? Depending on how you decide to describe a shadow, you could either call it a thing or not call it a thing. And so, if you just decide not to call it a thing, then it's nothing.
Yeah, so what if you decided to not call anything a thing? You didn't ascribe anythingness. Like instead of saying the universe is one, you went the opposite and you went ontological nihilism and said that nothing exists, as in there are no things. There's no thinginess.
It doesn't, and it does exist based on perspective.
I think once again it's just a semantical issue. It's if we define thing as X and we can imagine let's say Y, and we don't call that thing because it's not X, then there we have a nothing. Since anything that's not X is nothing, so there we have a nothing. But if everything that we can imagine we call X, then everything that we can think of and imagine is something, and therefore there would never be a Y and there would never be a nothing, because everything that we could think of it would just turn into the X. It would fall into the X category of the thing category. So I think it's a semantical issue.
Yeah.
I don't think being able to think of something should make it a thing.
And if you expand out, those group of things would be described as a thing.
Well, here's the argument for this that I'm gonna try to make, and it's like, like if you have an apple, why is that apple a thing, and how is it separate from the branch it came from, which came from the dirt beneath it and the seed and all that stuff? Like why is the apple the thing and not the apple plus leaf plus branch plus the life cycle of the tree plus the entire apple tree lineage? Why are you separating it at that point? And even if you do, you can cut an apple in half. So why isn't that 2 1/2 of an apple or
They are
3
separate.
1/3?
They're not separate depending on your perception.
Yeah, I can't eat a lineage.
Yeah, so it's a useful ascribed thinginess. Semantically, it's a like oh, I forgot your name and I can't look at the thing. Sevi? What was it? Swaxy. I was close.
Yeah.
Why do you,
There's the
why do you have to do that?
do what?
Okay, you say we have to establish first what do we describe as a thing?
Yeah, to a certain degree. We have to get to the bottom of what it means to be a thing and move past the semantical nature of thinginess, which is due to our like we're a conscious entity. We're a being that models the world, and we are in a sense our own model of ourselves. And so we need to move past like this weird boundary between the language we use and the world that we're describing with the language. And I think the best way to do that is to start just at the semantical like nature of it, where you're saying like if no people existed, nothing would exist because no one would be there to parse the universe and divide it into things. There would just be this big infinite nothing, like gradient of nothing.
Or it
And
could just be
that's
one group thing of a universe.
yeah,
It would
but well,
just-
it would be if there was like a really dumb guy who could only conceive of one thing, and he was just like universe, that's the one thing. But if he didn't even exist, then there would just be this infinite. Well, possibly it doesn't necessarily. It's not necessarily infinite, but there would be this thing that's not a thing because nothing's ascribing thinginess.
So not everything's connected and all's connected.
Well, I mean, sorry if I missed anything. I just got back, but Dalsu, what you're describing is abstract. So it's unfortunately going to play in
Yeah.
semantical, and if you want to take it out of the semantical
Yeah.
nature of abstract concept and try to put it into reality, then those things have names. And those things have
Yes.
have definition.
And
And
thank
so,
you for
yeah.
going there, Grim, because that goes to our second type of nothing, which we kind of already touched on, but it's the lack of particles, and it's basically just the like energy can still be there, and space and time and physics, but if you just get rid of all the particular nature of like the quantum foam, and you just have like this single spread of multiple waves of energy that spread infinitely across the whatever space that would be, the infinite space.
So there's nothing colloquially, which is like, hey, what's in space? Nothing, right? There's nothing in space,
Yeah.
because it feels like a void, but it kind of isn't a void, but it feels like a void. The colloquial term, I think we can point to all day long, right? Like, what's going on in your head right now? Nothing. Fucking high
If
as
you
shit.
expand wide enough and you use a group of things, you can group those things together, and that group would be a thing, would be identified as a thing.
And we've recognized the semantical nature of nothing. But if we want to move past that, we have to recognize like, okay, nothing can mean whatever we want. But let's just say,
because when you're talking about something, it's still semantical. When you even say there's a thing, it's semantical.
Yeah, no thing is a thing.
So let's answer another round of questions. Is there such a thing as like the second definition of nothing, which is something free of particles?
Yeah, like
the free of particles version of nothing.
Like the second version of nothing, which just means there's essentially energy existing in its wave format rather than its particle wave.
So is there really such a thing as total vacuum of the total vacuum of space?
Because I think physicists probably dabble in this realm. Like, there's probably some physics papers of like, well, if anti-de Sitter space came to mind, so that might be connected. I don't know, but that's what popped in my head just now. But basically, the idea of a space without any sort of particles or necessarily like gravity attraction between them, but a sort of infinite space of smeared particles, since like the wave nature of the particles kind of extends them infinitely outward, and so you would just kind of you would almost view each wave like universal wave function of just the entire field, like the electric field and
the micro radio background, radio wave background of like the universe, where it's just stretched out Waves.
Yeah, kind of. Except you could imagine like there's the electromagnetic spectrum, and then there's like the space time spectrum.
Let me describe it in
You
sort
mean in
of
gravity and
I mean,
think
they're all
gravity connecting
fields.
things.
Yeah, they're all fields.
let me describe it in in
Gravity
something
connecting things is a
Yeah.
thing.
It's all
Yeah, I want to
fields.
go to.
Go ahead, do it.
So you guys are probably at least minimally familiar with the way electrons behave in atoms and how they're not really in one place necessarily, and the probability of their location
Quantum tunneling. Yes.
is in some not quantum tunneling.
That's what they do.
That's not what I'm trying to describe. So the exact location of an electron is not really something you can determine, but it's probabilistically in one place or another in a geographical location around the nucleus of an atom. And the farther you get from its most probable location, the probability of it being there doesn't go to zero. It just gets much smaller. So even if you go out to far from an atom, there's still a probability that the electron will be there.
It could quantum tunnel essentially.
So can you say that quantum tunneling is when it is not. We're not talking about quantum tunneling.
Okay.
What I'm just talking about is there's a probability that the electron that's in an orbital around an atom can be very far from that atom. Right. It's not quantum tunneling. Yeah. It's just that it's flying around and we don't know where it is, and it could be over here, it could be over there.
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
It's uncertain where the electron is, and so even if you're out in free space far from the nearest atom, there's still a probability that you will find an electron there.
Also, can I make a point?
Though it may be vanishingly small. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the point of clarification, and I want to know if anybody disagrees with the following. I think when we're searching for, is there an existence of nothing, what we're really asking is, what are the categories of things? Because we're never going to find a nothing. Anything that is not in the category of things, if we can figure out what it is, then we'll just make it into another category. So what we're asking is, what are the different categories of things? And then what we're searching for is how many we could come up with, how many are different. And then we're just trying to categorize things, and that's really what we're working on.
Perfect. So
can I say one thing? Technically, all things are connected, and depends on your view, they're not connected.
The way I want to...
And I could just say nothing is categorized like, here's something that is nothing. It's a... And there you go.
Oh, you freaking Hindu guru, son of a bitch.
You like that? It's a...
There
you go.
Direct quote by Dalsu, you freaking Hindu.
You
freaking Hindu.
Dude,
what are you doing?
I got two things to say. First off, have you seen that interview with the journalist and the Dalai Lama, and he tells the Dalai Lama the joke about like a bagel with everything or a pizza with everything, and the Dalai Lama stares at him and he's like, I don't fucking get it. Like he's like, what? And he's like looking at his translator, and I was like, dude, that was fucking comedy gold. Like you're telling the joke to the Dalai Lama and he's looking at you like a fucking idiot. And number two, I don't know if you guys heard the big news, but it looks to be that they have officially done nuclear fusion. So they sold it. Yeah. So it looks like they put together a reactor, and their first experiment was a success. They fused
positive energy output, I'm assuming is what you mean.
Fused hydrogen. They successfully fused hydrogen in a 1 million degree reactor.
Who's they, and what's the wattage of the reactor?
I don't know what the wattage was, but the reactor hit 1 million degrees.
Dude, can you imagine the material science that went into that? To building such a thing?
The 316 stainless and the magnetic field.
It's a European. It's on the news right now. It's a European fusion reactor. I think it's German. It cost them $3 billion to build.
You know, it's really weird. These nuclear power plants are water cooled, and they say I can't put water coolant in my car. Like, why do I have to buy antifreeze?
Ask them the real questions. Ask them the real questions.
We got nuclear
Anyway,
water power plants, so I can't put
We're
fucking water in
we're
my
supposed to
goddamn
talk
car.
about nothing, and if we get into nuclear power, that's quite
Sorry.
something that we're going into.
It was big news. It's a big week. Everyone's been talking about us trying to solve, once we solve nuclear fusion, I mean, fucking, it's all that. It's like, we just did. How amazing is that? People have been asking for it for 100 years.
I thought someone had made fusion before.
Yeah,
I think the problem was that it was
It's theoretical.
no energy production.
The problem with nuclear fusion is controlling it and making the reaction self-sustainable, and whatever they have to contain it in a magnetic field because there's no material that can withstand the temperature. And then how do you capture the energy and turn it into useful work? And that's the hard part.
Yeah. So it's really cool. Really cool that they finally did it. So it's like the experiment solid state right now. They think that in theory we can do it. There's been some testing on it, but we haven't officially made a solid state battery yet. Just super close. Sorry, Delsu.
Well, maybe we should, since I tried to get rid of particles, guys, and we fused them. I don't know how that happened. Let's just skip to the number 3 version of nothing, where it's just we get rid of energy and particles, so it's basically just the ability for things to exist in a space. And I think that's pretty boring, because maybe you might be able to argue that's still a thing or whatever, but we could go there. But you have number 5, which basically is the one that goes past physics where we're at, because essentially the 4th way of looking at nothing, which is just. Oh wait, no, I'm skipping to the 4th. That's what I mean. So the 4th way of looking at it is essentially the way that we've gotten to in the scientific realm, where Krauss says the universe came from nothing. He really means it came from a time and place where there was no time and place, before there was energy or matter ever, and before there was necessarily a space for them to exist in. And so we end up with the Kraussian nothing, which is essentially the nothing that still, as Pangburn might say, had this probability space that could lead to a space where we could have the possibility to create particles and gravity and all the things.
Can I say one thing?
I don't buy that one.
Which one? The Kraussian or the possibility space?
I just don't see how it's falsifiable, but
the singularity that the entire universe just emerged from a single point, infinitely dense. I don't buy this thing. Possibility space, sure.
I mean, if you connect it with, this is what I think is my favorite way of doing it in the scientific realm, and it's with freaking Primrose, Roger Primrose, and his conformal cosmology. He basically connects what we were talking about earlier, the space where there is no particles and it's just these all energy fields. He basically says that when you reach that space, locality breaks down. And so basically you could think of it as a massive set of different types of particle. Like you'd have the electromagnetic spectrum as one particle, essentially one thing, and it would be stacked on top of all of the other fields that would be making up things, and then that would be the singularity, and eventually that would explode for whatever reason or expand out. And as that expands and cools and the particles form in that expansion, and then as it expands enough, those particles would blip out like bubbles popping, and then it would be another infinite expanse of waves in which they're all stacked on top, and it'd be another singularity.
So my question is, at what point does the second law of thermodynamics come into play? Does that still hold in that state of the universe?
I think it does. I'm not actually educated enough to know if if he gets around, like, he might get around it just by opening the space again, essentially, because you get to this point where once thermodynamics has acted and we are as spread out as possible, that is also the reverse of entropy. Being totally entropic essentially is the same thing as having zero entropy, because they're even, I guess.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure that I fully follow the whole idea that like maximum, like whatever order, I guess is the word we're looking for, would be the same as maximum entropy. But I don't know. I could be convinced of that, but I just don't think I follow it.
Yeah, it's one that I like, but I'm not super good on it. But yeah, essentially, I think if we look at, I think that's pretty much where science rests, is somewhere like you have the Kraussian type of nothing that was at the beginning of the universe as we know it.
Yeah.
And then so we should be leading into the heat death, which would essentially be our number 2 type of nothing, the lack of particles.
Okay, so the connection there is that they're both states of nothing, like in a colloquial sense.
In this sense, I'm splitting up the word nothing into 9 or 10 different definitions so that we can talk about it. Sure. Because like we've already tackled 5 or 6 times, nothing is a very I forgot the word now. It's a wordy word. You can define it as just about anything. Nothing can mean anything, and anything can mean nothing.
But we need nothing, and you need something, because it's about identifying something. In order to get understanding, things are connected, and you have to see how they relate to each other. And those things and how they relate to each other, you group them, and they'll be formed as a thing. Because you could always come down, and there's always space between something. And when you expand out, there's
I think I get what you're saying, but I would almost think that if you are like if the context in which we're talking about nothing is about relationships between things, then I would think of nothing as a non-relationship, essentially, right?
But it's hard to get that, is what I'm saying.
Like no
and
things.
It's kind of like on a perspective. I'm talking about like it's about the human mind and to get understanding of things, and where in order to get understanding, you have to see how things relate, and you get those group of things and how they relate to each other. You group them together, and they'll come together as a thing. So you could identify that. You could communicate that. You expand out all the solar systems are connected. I mean, all the planets are connected through gravity, and that'll form a solar system. So that'll be identified as a thing.
That's okay.
Yeah. But we're kind of heading back towards our first type of nothing, where it's just a lack of recognition of things at that level. That's the only thing nothing could really mean.
It depends on your perspective.
I think maybe
in grouping and not grouping.
Well, yeah, if you can't group things, to you nothing would exist because you don't exist. If you don't exist, nothing can exist, right? And that's kind of Descartes' whole thing. He tries to escape the idea that nothing could exist, and the demon could be tricking him through saying, well, I exist, and therefore that means everything exists at some level. But I think that's semantic.
You expand out wide enough, and that group of things would become a thing. You call it something.
Yeah, you would call it something. But now let's define nothing so that instead of, because I could use the word system, right, to describe that same thing. I could say there's a system of cells, and that system of cells makes up me as a body, and then I could continue that way, just saying
where I'm getting at is all connected.
Yeah, and I recognize that, as I'm a Taoist or whatever. But in order to move on, Nivik, we have to pick a definition for nothing that's not that's not non-exist. Because if nothing doesn't exist, we can't like conversation over, right? So let's pick a definition. And science has kind of like Lawrence Krauss picked a definition of nothing, and it was like the pre-Big Bang sort of nothing, the nothing that led to the something that we have now that upsets a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And like, well, maybe we should move past that because we
Things that aren't connected to each other and how you view it, they're not related to each other. That, but I guess between that would be nothing. Hypothetically, I don't know.
Yeah,
so like, I go ahead.
I was gonna say if we want to get away from the physics definition of nothing and just kind of talk a little bit more abstractly, I think you could maybe make a case for a concept of nothing with mathematics. And someone had mentioned the empty set, and I think it might be that the empty set is the only thing that we can say that would come close to it. And one way of thinking about that is like, if mathematics is sort of a way of abstracting the notion of like quantity away from the physical, like then, you know, if not like if in the physical world nothing would be defined as like a negation of a thing, like a thing is and then a thing is not, you know, then it would seem to me that if we abstract or if we try to quantify what that thing is, we can say there is one thing and then there are no things, and then there's like you're left with a set with nothing in it. I don't see how we can get away from describing it as an empty set.
From the idea of science, I think the third explanation is the best contender, but from logical perspective, I think that nothing is just a lack of qualifiers for something. Like there is no qualifiers for a specific property or ability to do something.
They say neutrinos pass through you, right? They're that tiny, and they go through your body like you're not even there, like you're nothing.
What's wrong with saying nothing is the absence of everything and anything?
I think it's the problem with that is it's like definitionally true. It's like tautology, you know. Or I could be thinking about it wrong, but maybe that's even okay for it to be a tautology. I'm not even sure. But that's kind of
the problem is that it's useless tautology, because if I say like, what is stopping me from going to sleep right now? Nothing. It's a useful concept, but something that is a lack of everything. What's the point of that definition? Where would we use it?
So what we're talking about is perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough because typically, you know, when we're quantifying things, we're describing relationships between things, kind of like what Nivik was saying. There's you almost have to talk in terms of a relationship to some concrete thing that does exist. Like a good example is if we said, you know, why did I pick up this pencil? And if I say, or like, if the answer is like nothing, then it's like what you're really saying colloquially is like, I have my reason and nothing more, which is sort of the same as saying like, I'm going to add nothing to one, and you're just left with one, right? It's just like I don't know. It's a quantifier that doesn't modify any other quantifier, you know?
Well, if there's nothing in his way from going to sleep, even though there are things around him, but it may be true to say there's nothing in his way. Or
So if
nothing.
there's
Nothing
Yeah,
stopping.
but like you're it's like an analysis in things that uh, act as an obstacle, and when you see that there is not a single entity that acts as an obstacle for that action, then there is nothing, and that's useful. It's a lack of qualified subject, basically.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're sort of defining the boundaries of a set,
Hmm.
and then saying there aren't
When you
any
see that
members of
nothing
that set.
qualifies,
Yeah.
I think there is still like a one or two more levels of nothing, but it gets essentially you just have to remove the brackets on the set and then still call it nothing. And I think that might qualify, because if you have a set, you're saying nothing exists within here, but then if anything exists outside of the set and the set essentially does not exist, then you could still have, like, there would still be something. It would just not be within the confines of that set. So if you kind
you
of,
mean like an unknown,
if you almost took like an
undiscovered?
infinite, wait, what? Yeah, like
You
almost
mean
like
like
an
undiscovered?
yeah, because like if you have something and it's in relation to nothing, then that nothing ceases to be because you can't be, and then all you have left is the something.
So,
Wait a second. You say
let me,
nothing is what's undiscovered.
Let me
Well,
try.
no, like
what I
if you
heard.
have, if someone says, "Hey, do you have any money?" and you say, "No, I have nothing," you know that's true. Like if you don't have any money,
but you're
there is
defining the set.
nothing there.
But
Right.
you're defining the set
the
as money, right? Like the
Right.
boundaries of that set is money. But there are other things outside of that set that are something. And
possible. You could say the possibilities. And so in this realm of no possibles, meaning that you wouldn't have that defining set to begin with. You don't have the possibility to have money, even. Money doesn't exist.
I almost think of like if you imagine a geometric space like in two dimensions, right? Like a plane of nothing that stretches out for infinity. We'll just call that plane nothingness, right? Then I would almost think that one way of thinking about categories is to say that as soon as you introduce a thing, it sort of displaces the area of that plane, you know? And as soon as you remove that something, then it essentially collapses to just the plane, and that's the nothingness, right? And so you can kind of well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like you can kind of get around the idea like if you want to take the brackets off the empty set, then that's what that essentially looks like, right? Because it would just have to, like, your concept of nothingness would have to expand infinitely across like every possibility.
Yeah,
And
but that's like that something that is undefined, basically. Because when you define something, it ceases to be part of it.
Right. So what I'm trying to say with the analogy of the plane is introducing, say, like a circle into that plane, that like canvas of potential things, is the act of definition, right? As soon as you remove that something from the plane, there is no definition anywhere. There's no distinctions, no boundaries, no categories. But you could arbitrarily introduce something from absurdity. It's like the absurd induction of a category, right? Because it can't follow from anything, but you can just introduce it.
So what's not connected between things and how you view it in relativity, in definition, that's nothing?
No, we're saying you get rid of all of those things that are related to one another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eliminate all categories, and then you get that more expansive nothingness, right?
Maybe we should, speaking of canvas of nothingness, we should canvas the room a little bit. Bruce, does nothing exist?
That was a good segue,
No.
by the way.
Thanks, I tried.
I would say no.
Nothing does not exist. So if
Mhm.
nothing,
Mm.
I'm gonna give you the funky thing I already did. But if nothing doesn't exist, then wouldn't that necessitate that it does exist? Because the non-existence of it is in fact what it is.
The absence of all things doesn't exist.
Explain.
Yeah, I think
I'm
you
just
went
saying.
straight to where we were. Yeah, the
I'm just saying
absence
that
of.
that's the term nothing is, if you're going to say it's the absence of all things. Material or not, I would say does not exist. So that state doesn't exist.
Yeah. So you wouldn't say it. Do you think it could have ever existed, or would it necessarily need to always have had a thinginess to it?
Not. I would say no.
But if there's no connection to things, then how you define a group relative to each other?
Well, the only way that I do that is through some
you would say what's
unification.
not.
Let him answer if you're going to ask a question. Vivek.
Yeah.
There's some unification requirement there. So, as far as we understand, there's never been a situation where the state of nothingness has been. So, the only time the state of nothingness would have been would be before creation. But even in that scenario, just reading Genesis, the Spirit of God was hovering over the deep or the waters. So even in that scenario, there's something that exists as a part of creation before light. So I think that nothingness hasn't ever existed.
Hey, could I add on just an idea to this?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two ways to look at this. There's you can conceptualize nothing as something mathematic or through physics, and that could be the absence of absolutely everything, like whatever. Let's say it's in space, perhaps, what the absence of certain particles or whatever have you that you can mathematically allude to. There's that definition, which is A, and then there's B. Even when you get to that definition, you'll just go around in a circle by defining that nothing as something. You could always define something. So it's this paradox so there's A and B in my mind.
Yeah, the like linguistic trap of nothing, and then there's the useful description nothing.
So it's kind of like a yin and yang kind of thing. They're mutually they're connected, but they're mutually exclusive kind of.
In a way, to describe the linguistic, to further describe the linguistic issue is that everything can be defined, and everything that it can be labeled. That nothingness is labeled as something. So then you enter that paradox. Go ahead. I
might have an issue with that. Is it possible that there's a something that would escape our ability to label it?
Let's see. Is there like something, an element that we just can't label?
Yeah, like a dark matter that it doesn't have a gravitational pull, so we don't even have that. Or maybe we're so distant, like like imagine, I don't know how familiar you are with philosophy, but there's the idea of like monism dualism and pluralism. So imagine like a pluralistic universe where there could be essentially a sort of particle that just doesn't interact at all with what we could ever even mathematically compute, much less experience. Would you call that possible thing? Would you call that nothing?
I suppose that would still, depending on the description that you have, what was it, pluralistic description that you gave it?
Yeah.
So it would still have a label, and if that label is unknown, it's still a label.
Okay, so it
doesn't.
it wouldn't be nothing. It would be the unknown, essentially.
Yeah, it would still be categorized as something, but it, like you said, it would be something we don't experience, so it is possible that there is something we don't, it lacks us experiencing it, but we still know of it.
Are you saying like a great void of nothing really being connected to each other, and that would be viewed like it's I guess in a way it's a scale, right? To varying degrees, like in space, there's just a void, and there's just absolutely nothing there connected, and that's nothing.
Well, yeah. If you play with the idea of reality and what am I thinking? Like you like to talk about cause and effect, and how everything leads into another thing. If you play with that long enough, you'll kind of realize that
there's little cause and there's little effect.
No, by definition, like in order to observe something, like it would have to interact with all the things that you're a part of. And so if you see everything as necessarily cause and effect, there couldn't ever be anything that's not cause and effect, because that would end up possibly falling into the nothingness definition, because you could never actually see it. But if you but you can also say, well, nothing just means it's not even able to be thought of as a non-visible thing. It would be more of an unknown thing than a uninteractable thing, I guess.
Okay, so seeing things, those are cause and effect related to each other, and that would be defined as a thing.
That would be defined as physical, at the very least physical, and probably to most people here as existing. If you do not interact with reality, there's a certain amount that you wouldn't really exist until you showed your existence and interacted with things. But you would exist just as this kind of unknown thing.
So nothing is a void that you can't see at all. So like if you look out and it's just complete dark, like light can't get back to you. That's the definition of nothing.
Well, for how we're defining it at this point in the conversation, I think we're defining nothing as not only a lack of anything, but also a lack of any possibility of there to ever be anything, and a lack of there having ever been anything. So we've kind of gone to this.
There's no connection in relating. There's no connection to anything.
There's no connection. There's no things to connect to each other. There's no ideas of the ability for there to be things or for the connections to exist. We've reached a point where we've negated. We've said nothing is literally just the negation of anything or its possibleness.
And technically, that would be called, what do you call it when you heat up the observable universe, right?
Well, no, because the unobservable universe is still a thing. It would just be unobserved, and so we're kind of getting into like the finger in the moon territory. Like if I point at the moon and call it the moon, it'll be named the moon or the unknown thing or that big white thing in the sky. But even if no one ever points at the moon and names it, it still exists as its own entity that's different from its surroundings. It just hasn't been distinguished as different from its surroundings. And so it wouldn't necessarily be no thing. It would just be an unknown thing.
How about this? Like
uncategorized.
If the universe is expanding and expanding at a faster speed of light, like maybe like many centuries later, you could be in a galaxy and you don't see anything around you, and you might think that you're the only galaxy, and all you do is see out when you look out is nothing. And that would be not wouldn't that be the definition of nothing? But you said that the unobservable universe is a thing, but the beings there wouldn't know anything about an unobservable universe.
Yeah, so they might call it nothing, but then the moment something pops out of it, they would be like, "Oh, there was this unknown thing."
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the universe there's not a universe though. But they just can't observe it because it's expanded to the point that they can't observe it. So it all depends on perspective.
Dal, have we touched on the Planck length yet?
I think we went into where like particle physics and Lawrence Krauss kind of rest, where we have the only thing that's left is like the space and the underlying physics that could generate reality.
Right.
I think that was like number 3.
Yeah. So it's like. Are we willing to call that measurable distance, the smallest, the thought to be the smallest measurable distance, the Planck length? Are we willing to call that length in between, how close we can get these two electrons together? Are we willing to call that nothing?
Would you be willing to call that nothing?
Also, if we had two electrons that were one Planck length apart from each other, you could say there's nothing in between them. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's my question for the room. Like, who's okay with calling that distance in between? And we're talking at the scale of 10 to the negative 35. 10 with 35 zeros. Much smaller. Much smaller than the atomic nucleus. What if that is not nothing to you? If you're still going to call this a state of potential, like I would, then you wouldn't have nothing. And you and Nivik, Dal, were just talking about. I think you were. What were you talking about right before I started?
The observable universe.
Yeah, I was trying to talk about how there's the difference between the nothing of like no things that exist and the nothing that includes like all possible things that could exist. So there's the nothing defined as no things, and then there's the nothing that's no things or any possible things or possible change.
Yeah. So as far as, just to give my answer to this, as far as I can tell, what you have to escape in order to get nothing is the state of potential. And that's the topic of my third book. I am writing 3 books at the same time because I find it impossible to just work on one with my attention span. But the you need to escape the state of potential, because even if you find a space where at any moment you can't measure any matter or energy, time, space, even spaceless, does that state, whatever topological representation you want to place in any state, does that state still have potential for something? Because I think that state itself is something, the state of potential.
It's paradoxical. The question is it's a creature chasing its own tail, in a sense, because no matter what degree you can open that space, it being chosen of physics through being chosen in that subject. If you go to that degree, minute degree, you will always find something. So I think my answer is there will always be something.
So
that's my answer.
Yeah, interesting. Now the other thing is, so there's the question of does, capital N nothing exist? But then there's also the question of, can capital N nothing exist? So
we touched on that a little.
Right.
I was asking a question on that
just
a little.
And
earlier.
the thing to think about is like, could we build a technology eventually, or could some super intelligent species eventually, or the matrix controller or whatever, completely delete all states of potential? And imagine it this way. Imagine you're the creator of World of Warcraft, and we are currently in an advanced version of World of Warcraft. Can you, as the programmer, delete all states of potential within the World of Warcraft? It seems to be possible. But then the question, when you kind of start getting into this infinite regress problem, because
I have an answer to that, Travis.
Because you may want to say, you may be inclined to say that although the deletion has happened, is there not potential to bring back what has been deleted?
I have an answer.
I
have an answer to that.
Go ahead, Nivik.
That's why I was mentioning before earlier to Delsu. I said, well, we have the observable universe of things expanding too fast that you can't see it, and what you look out and you can't see, that in itself is nothing. And Delsu says, nope, that's the unobservable universe.
Ooh,
that is something.
Yeah.
And that's beyond it. But I gave a hypothetical. If the universe is expanding at the speed of light, you have Milkdromeda. You have in the future where all the universe expand to the point where you can't see anything, and you look out. Technically, that would be nothing. So based on their perspective of the beings there at that time, their view of what they look out and see, that would be nothing. But that wouldn't be true. So they wouldn't know that it does, that the universe has exist or has ever exist, because they could never see it. So it's based off perspective.
Yeah. So
hey, Travis.
Yeah, go ahead.
That infinite digress that you mentioned, I think that's honestly a good way of resting, in the sense, because it will be that. Like, I believe that in that computer metaphor you set.
Yep.
Even in that domain, like, there will always be the domain. The domain can't get rid of itself.
Right.
Like, so you will fall into that hand drawing itself.
I do have this was number 9 on my list of 10 possible nothings. So
that's what Delta was saying, by the way, when you said there'd be an observable universe. Just saying. I
do have one more nothing that I think is more nothingness than no possibilities, basically, alongside all the other nothings.
I want to hear it.
And this wasn't one of Robert Kuhn's either. This is one I added to his list. He had 9, and I went, which ended at possibility. So Pangburn, maybe you and Robert Lawrence Kuhn have something in common. But I basically had the 10th one be all of the other rules we've discussed so far. There's no possibility, none of those things, but there's also no negation of any of those things. There's no lack of any of those things either, because each of those negations is in and of itself a thing that you can use to describe the nothing. And if you're describing the nothing, it's not necessarily that nothing. So I would argue that true nothing is actually not different than everything, because it would have this contradictory nature to it.
Now,
yeah.
That's definitely interesting. But is it possible is it possible to, like, here, hypothetically, is it possible for there to be the first state of potential and to rewind to that space and have that have all state of potential deleted through that by regressing to what would be called, or what actually is, the first state of potential?
Yeah, I guess I would say that regressing, the ability to go back, is a part of the potential. So like the going back and trying to erase everything would still be a potential version of that reality that happens due to that matrix controller. But I think where you and me run into an issue, Pangburn, is I don't like to stay in my time zone. I like to go to the meta time zone immediately and say that's still reality. Like
I'm
World of Warcraft.
Happy to go. Yeah, I'm happy to go macro scale. You have to, and just so if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I have these terms of macro time, which would be all time, the recording of all change that has ever been, because in physics, time is just change. So that would be the macro time scale.
This is a conceptual travel of like retrospect. You mean like broad? You're talking broad.
Yeah, I'm saying all change that has ever occurred to anything. This includes all multiverses out there. I'm talking about anything. Not
universe.
Yeah.
If there even is whether there's an origin or not, you will answer the metaphysical question.
Yeah.
Pabbar, we answered the infinite domain question with me and Datsu. I was saying with the well, if you can't observe, if the universe is unobservable, then that itself is nothing. And he said, but you said unobservable universe. You just identified something. So
yeah, that's the linguistic cycle. You can.
But I gave a hypothetical of, you have the universe expanding, and when it gets to a point where you have the galaxy and you don't have anything else, it expands beyond observation. The beings there wouldn't know that there was a universe, and what they see and when they look out would be nothing.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be nothing. They would just call it nothing.
Well,
to us, they can't perceive it.
To us, it wouldn't be that way. But to them, it would. So it's based off perspective.
But we're talking, Nivik. We're trying to come up with the objective answer, not the subjective interpretation of what information you can measure. You can measure at the time.
It's not what is perceivable. It's not regarding that, that's a good way of putting it, Travis. That's a good way of putting it.
And I think I'm going to still stick with. I think I'm still going to stick with. At the end of the day, nothing has to. It has to remain an abstract concept. The moment you try to describe it, the moment it does not become abstract, it loses the quality of the concept itself.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You're gonna fail if you say, well, what if we called nothing this? Nope. Well, what if it was this? Nope. You can't, because you're gonna destroy the concept.
In a way, I mean, if you
sorry, but the best way to describe nothing is simply, yep.
No, you're right. It works within a system, which is what call it reality. You can't escape reality. Therefore, the nothing of the absence of it can't.
So we're chasing our tails.
And the reason why is because you can't, because I don't believe any human who can actually think of nothing. It just doesn't. It's not physically possible. I don't think it's physically possible of a human to think, probable to have a human think of nothing. It's not going to make any sense.
Let's say you define nothing as what Travis has delved in, which is going into a micro. Obviously it goes into the metaphysical macro subjects that he was defining, but going into the macro, like exiting the system itself, by going very in depth into, you can define it, but the subject from the perceptor's point of view will still be something, is I think what you're referring to.
So then if you say, well, reality is something, then you're already fucked because it can't exist within reality.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But we can think about you're right. It will forever remain an abstract.
So with like using things as a metric, like if we go back to the World of Warcraft example, or no, let's look at like what we call a human life, like brain dead equals dead. Typically, someone might use nothing in a sense, and this is probably where it's most useful. In that, with regards to that person's life or life force, you can say that it is now at nothing. If you're including, the brain being functioning and operating as they were, as it was when they were alive, like we have the definition of what death is in medicine. So it's like you could say that with in this situation, using the metric of what it means to be alive, that person is now nothing.
You'll scientific best. We're talking about that in relation to sets. If you had a set, you could say there's zero within a set, but could you say that there's just zero and subtract the set?
That's a good point. I think you have parameters to define nothing, and so that he is nothing regarding his life. He's not alive. But when you talk about, I suppose, like the energy, I don't know how applicable that law of energy is never destroyed but transferred. I'm not sure if that's applicable.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about with regard to that is like, I think one way to get around the creation or destruction of energy and matter is the idea that like what makes a thing, like what the process involved in placing a thing in a set, or like defining a thing as being in a set. That process is less about like instantiating the thing and more about defining the boundaries. And so by defining the boundaries in such a way that nothing is in it, like you kind of like define nothing that way. Like, and one way to think about that in physics is to say, like we really don't care where energy and matter came from, but we can't say anything in the universe is a thing until we begin to draw distinctions between parts of the universe. And as long as we just don't do that, we just don't try to break it up into categories, it's just a uniform, nothing. That's like one way to think of nothing. But it's also, I'm not sure if that's like that reasonable, just because you could also think of it as like you're reducing it to one thing, like one whole thing, and just refusing to break it up into subcategories. So you don't end up with nothing, you end up with one thing. But I'm not sure.
So this was the next level of nothing I kind of brought up earlier a little bit, but and it was basically the concept of nothing being all that we've described. You can have a set with zero in it, and then if you take out the set, you expand that nothingness outward, and then the next level of nothing would essentially be the lack of the negation of any of those things. So you would neither have those things nor a lack of anything, because a lack of something is like a negative set, right? That's just you're applying it when you don't have this thing and that thing. Your set isn't actually zero; it's actually
negative integers.
Yeah, and negative integers. So the true nothing would essentially be equal to infinity in my mind, because you would end up with just an infinite set of negative integers and an infinite set of positive integers
that kind of cancel each other out, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to jump off that very briefly.
Sure.
Does that raise the idea of like a negative universe then? Like, could you imagine like a equal but opposite universe to ours that sort
A
of
nega
contradicts
world.
ours? Yeah.
That's
Well,
a.
and then if you like, I don't know, like let's just imagine that for every conceivable universe, like they all might exist, but every conceivable negative version of that universe also exists, and therefore they all equate to like nothing in a sense. But I'm not sure. That's like super
I'm seeing a response.
philosophical,
I'm
not
seeing a response in the
falsifiable.
comment section. It
Yeah.
says, "Can't nothing and something both exist?"
I think
Only as
Depending
the
so.
on
boundaries
depending on
intersect.
perspective.
I don't know what your name is. Scientific best is the username, but I want to hear more about that concept you were, unraveling of the negative universe, or however you perceive as nothing. I want to hear more.
Oh, okay. Well, I've thought about this before. Um, just trying to imagine how a multiverse might look like what that might look like. And one one way that I don't know just seems kind of intuitive to me is that essentially every possible universe that could exist and the set of universes that like can exist, they all do exist. And um, essentially the way you end up with matter and energy without violating the second law of thermodynamics is that you have an equal and opposite um, you know force or like negative energy or mass, because you can't just arbitrarily instantiate energy or mass or like matter, um, just from absurdity, because that's like by definition absurd. But you could imagine um, like the inverse of that happening simultaneously.
Ah, there you go. Okay, I get you now. Like we live in this domain now, the negative equivalent of that domain.
Yeah, exactly. We would
Okay.
never be able to think level that is, but if it makes the math work, then I don't know. Maybe that's an idea.
Mm. Yeah, it's still
You're
in a way
you're
like no escaping
you're
it. In a way, I would say.
you're referring to basically I forgot exactly the concept, but you're referring to particles which cancel out each other, and then
Yeah,
if you had a consistent basis across the universe through space-time, what they would do is you'd have a rapid expansion and then a complete collapse because the particles would essentially cancel out each other, leaving essentially nothing.
yeah, basically that. But it wouldn't
Wait.
have to collapse, like,
Yeah.
because
That was the
well,
model that was shown to me was an expansion, but then as it expanded, then the particle then it slowly came down because the Big Bang, like
Yeah,
Big Bangs, but then you had a
mhm.
particle collapse. And so because
I
you had
think
particles
the
negating each other, which is what is the is which is what they're trying to say is antimatter right now, like particles negating each other, but there's
It
something
could
more to
be
it they don't understand.
well, so
yeah
it could be that collapse is the the way the inverse universe works. Like instead of the inverse universe having like a big bang, it has a big collapse, you know, potentially.
yeah
I don't
like
know.
a existence cycles between negative and positive universes essentially. So ours collapses into the expansion of the negative.
Yeah, I could see that as long as we're not smuggling in the concept of time within all that. You could think
Uh,
of it as simultaneous if you want, but like everything
yeah.
happens all simultaneously, maybe.
Well, I would disagree with that
But
because
okay.
there are really good imaginative ways of describing time in a way where where energy can stop moving
Hmm.
for an allotted amount of time, and in that case, an arbitrary description of nothing like happens, right? Just time. That's it. And time would be one of those things where it's like as long as then it picked up again. Like imagine if you're as an observer, this moment right now and in between my words to the observer was thousands of years.
Right.
Nothing happened in our universe,
So,
and then it
so I
continued.
think, so I understand. I think I understand what you're saying, but I would disagree because I think the contemporary like notions of what time is essentially a measurement of entropy in a system that's evolving, and so you can't really talk about time without um,
Time is relative, right?
without the motion of energy
A
and matter.
macro time, not the universal causal time, but a larger time, a time outside
Yeah.
of space, like
Yeah.
reality time. The other scary bit too is that
I'm not sure that exists. I think you haven't.
it's not. The other thing is too is it's not scary. It is scary to think of this, but it is not physically impossible for all the particles to start canceling out each other at this point. Like it could be happening even right now that we don't know, and it would wipe our universe from existence. All the particles just would not be here anymore.
Can I respond at a time? But what's not happening between the time of nothing? Whatever is not happening.
Zero potential.
Whatever is happening, whatever those two things that it's not happening between, that is viewed. Those two things are viewed as something.
Zero potential happens, and then for some reason it continues.
So, but here's the
get what
problem
I'm
with
saying,
that.
though, right?
Here's the problem with that, though. Like you have, in order to have this notion of a time outside of like the universe's like clockwork motion type thing going on, in order for you to have that concept, you have to have an external reference frame. You really can't, like, we can't prove that an external reference frame exists. You would have to have like, say, a second universe to compare our universe to in order for that concept to be coherent.
Well,
and those two things.
Just to add on to that, I'd have to say that the reference point would be found more or less in a chosen theology or a metaphysical established claim.
And those two things equals a thing. The reference point between those two things of time.
I'm not. So I'm not following with the theology bit. Like, are we?
He just therefore God you. You lost.
No,
right.
I meant to say that, like, in order to talk about time in a frame that is broader, one that doesn't follow entropy and our current environmental forces, you would have to have, I suppose, metaphysical subjects laid out. That would be a reference point of talking about. Time is a metaphysical subject. In order to talk about, some people have said that time is synonymous to a ring that only travels one time. That is an abstract claim I've heard in metaphysics.
But the time between those two things is a thing.
Sure, but that escaping that, it would be more of an abstract manner of looking at what time is.
Well, yeah, but the thing is like,
time is connected by two things.
As soon as you introduce like a connection between the two, that gets really complicated really fast. Like if there's this metaphysical subject that can witness the sort of entropic motion of the universe, and then you're already positing
because
but the interaction, like entanglement of that subject with the universe kind of puts it inside of the universe in a way. Like it's
that's right.
Almost,
100%.
There's always a space of time between two things.
But then it's subject to time. Then it is because it exists in the universe now. It's part of that entropic motion of the universe that eventually, like, it defines what time is in our universe. So it's almost like a paradox. I'm not sure that you can get out of that.
I would have to say that's correct. The time, if being introduced in a certain theological stance. I don't want to choose one, neither smuggle one. But if one has to introduce a theological stance, which includes time, and that entity being a part of the environment and also not a part of it, then I would have to say that it does enter like this paradox you just mentioned. And a way to understand it would probably be that it would be time itself. That would be the entity that exemplifies time itself. Which not sure how even like conversational that is.
You
Yeah,
can't have time without a thing.
It's hard for me to kind of conceptualize that, just because time really is a description of relationships between objects that interact,
Right.
It's like it's the causal sequence of the universe. We're just like we're all we're doing is like taking discrete frames of the universe and labeling them.
It's the measurement of change
But
between
that's
those
it.
two things.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as like you start to say that, like you want something to exist outside of like a time system,
or within it, but yeah.
Well, I was going to say, in the case where it's outside the time system, it almost by definition cannot interact with that system, because by interacting with that system, it becomes part of the system.
By acknowledging time, you acknowledge matter, and time's a measurement of change. Of matter.
I would say that it more introduces the more mortality and immortality, and then one would have to say, oh, that's just mystical, fable oriented, bullshit stances. But still, it's still relevant to enter that metaphysical idea of something that can't decay, something that can't erode. I would say.
We could just sort of like assert that, but I'm not sure that it logically coheres with how we understand physics today.
100%. I agree.
We could say we are born from potential, so maybe potential has always existed, and so you can use that argument to say it's just consistently changing. The law of entropy might work in a closed system, but it is undecided if the law of entropy works in a system like the universe.
Right. No, 100. Yeah, that's right. The only I don't know if it was Euclidean or like some philosopher said that the only thing certain is change. So in a way that does describe our current environment. That it goes into entropy and what have you.
Wait, but if he's wrong, then he's right. Fuck.
If he's wrong. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It would be incoherent to say that immortality is a possibility because it hasn't been proven. Everything decays.
Therefore, God. No, I'm just joking.
No,
The universe was made from God.
I feel people struggling with this. It's interesting to see the dynamic of the toxicity of religion and the beautiful intellectual flourishing of science, and just the battle of the centuries. Like it's interesting to see that spectrum and how it even affects people. I would even say.
Yeah, it's funny to me because like most of the time that someone brings in a deity into the conversation, it's usually to introduce like an explanation.
Yeah,
we're trying to explain something, and you can usually, if you dig deep enough into the conversation, you can figure out what God is explaining in that moment, in that context. Like, why does evil exist, or what happens when we die, or what started the universe, and
the origin of intelligence.
Why should we go and kill all the people in that land and take their land?
Yeah, more of the monotheistic Judaism.
How do I take this sharp rock to this kid's penis again?
Circumcision. That was hilarious. I don't know. I think I suppose what made me think about time and like I suppose the reason why I introduced it was because in order to even escape it, it kind of that's a way of talking about it that would be outside of this system. That's probably the only reference I can draw, And I'm not advocating any uh, theology, just to say, But that, I suppose, my bad. My could have been an accident, or it could have been a good subject. Who knows? But yeah, my apologies. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I think the subject at hand would be the nothing or the something, and it kind of it naturally does bring that meta form of conceptualizing what the hell the environment even is, whether you can escape it. Is there an escape to it? And the answer would be no. There is no escaping the environment. Even the World of Warcraft domain that you can delete. It's like you'll still have that computer, or you'll still have whatever behind it. Isn't no escaping it. It's too much. You'd have to be omnipotent. See, that's why I bring in those annoying religious wordings. It would have to be an omnipotent power. It would have to be a sort of maximum power to even have nothing, because you would have to erase all the connections to it, and maybe you'd have to create like a void. How the hell do you create a void?
I saw in the comments section, can't nothing and something both exist?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is yes, but the only way that happens is you start to carve out boundaries where like there are no things within those boundaries.
So it depends on relativity and perspective of you seeing a group set of something, and I get what you're saying. And then you
a parameter, choosing parameters to work with or to create the subject.
But you also have to define existence as something that can happen to nothing.
It's how you reason to get understanding of things. You have to separate and you have to group.
Right. You need some induction somewhere. Like something just needs to be introduced from.
Right.
That's how you reason. That's how you rationalize.
From
you have
absurdity. Yeah. Usually I think in math they typically call that just like induction from absurdity or something along those lines. It might be
a frame reference of rationalizing of understanding things, and where you subset and then you have in a group, and then you divide in separating. In us viewing things separate. It's all about perspective.
Mathematicians in here can correct me, but I want to say that it might have something to do with the incompleteness theorem, but I'm not totally sure. It might be unrelated, but
that sounded relevant.
It's been a while since I've even looked at those things.
I think it has to do with reasoning. And how do you reason? You reason by rationalizing information of causality of this thing right here that I identify as a subset.
Would you guys
in one thing? And
would you guys?
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. You go ahead, Nevik. I want to hear you.
No, I was just saying, like, it's about reasoning, and in how you reason, you take matter as information, and you see how that relates to another thing, in relation.
Yeah, that's right.
So you in order to identify something, you have to group it as a subset and identify it as a thing, and do that with something else and identifying that, because those two separate things, you want to see how they relate to each other. And then you equate those two things to each other in order to get an understanding of causality, of logical outcome. So if I take this two group sets here, and I take this group set here, I take that group set there, and I see how they, I connect them together in relating them to each other, that would equal this in identifying something else, a new form of information, in getting in order to get understanding, of your environment, to navigate it, because all things are connected. You know what I mean? And that,
You mean
depending on how
nothing?
you want to see how they and how they connect relative to you, for you to to get understanding, to see how they connect relative to you, depending on whatever matter you're in, whatever situation you're in, you have to equate. You have to take those sets together, and you have to factor them and see how and what is the result of those things relative to you, in order to navigate the environment that you're in.
We can't just make anything up without connecting previous tools that we have acquired before.
Would you guys agree that in order to truly define nothing, it would have to exit any formed concept within its space? Therefore,
Within space?
no, within anything around it, within anything around it. In order to truly have nothing, it would have to exit any formed concept. It would have to be the absence of absolutely everything. That would be the only that would be the only truly nothing.
Nothing's only a
That was
perception.
that was a point I wanted to bring forth. Like, whatever nothing is, it has to be absence of anything we know up until this point.
Right.
Right.
So it just goes back to no matter how many to what degree you wanna take away, I suppose, to what degree you want to make that lack something, there can't truly be nothing.
I was wondering, when would an answer be satisfactory when we're talking about nothing? Like, if we had a definition for nothing, would you be able to call that a something, whatever that was?
Yes, and you'd be able to label it, sure. That nothing would be something.
You know why it's hard? Because human beings rationalize by relating things to each other in order to get understanding.
That's a good point, Nevik. I think so.
Yeah.
And as soon as you connect anything to another thing, that automatically makes
you cancel out
nothing.
That's right.
Automatically not nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
that was going back to what I was saying before about it's about perspective of navigating the environment that you're in. Like, you look at your surroundings and you see matter, and you take that matter in a subset, and you identify that subset group as a thing, and then this subset group as a thing, and how those things matter relative to you in order for you to survive. Cause and effect.
That's what we all do. I was thinking, if nothing is absence from anything we know of, then the only state where we're not aware of the things we know is when either before we're born or after we're dead. So it's basically a question of, I don't know, it seems to me like if we're talking about nothing, it almost seems to me that we need to get out of our consciousness in some way. We can't define nothing within what we can observe, or within what we can understand. It seems like some sort of deity concept. Like, nothing doesn't make sense unless we bring in some sort of experience or concept that seems absurd to us.
So we're chasing our tails.
It's described in regards to describing it. It's inescapable.
Yeah, that seems to me like we can't get out of unless we have some revolutionary discovery of the origin of our universe or something.
That's right. It would answer that.
We're giving it a good try, though.
For sure. That's
It's
a good
definitely
point.
worth the problem.
That's for sure. It would enter that external force. It would enter that subject of an external force. Yeah, no, it's nothing and something is more metaphysical and abstract than one truly can think about.
Yep, because it's nothing that I have to be able to use nothing in in just a normal language sense.
Yeah.
No expert in any field ever has ever had a reason to use nothing as a literal concept as we're trying to find right now. No field in anything claims a version of nothing that would satisfy this discussion, right?
Say that one more time. I want to hear that again.
What I said was no field or expert field that has ever existed or exists now would even have a version of what nothing is that would satisfy this conversation.
That's
No
right.
one, yeah.
That's right. There's no philosophical satisfactory explanation. I mean, one could surely try.
Yeah,
we do have a
because
pretty
there are
good
a few
physical explanation.
There are a few tries, right? But none of them really. They all use some sort of materialistic, I don't know, perspective.
What was that,
Right?
Lebowski? Big Lebowski?
Yeah, there's so in the world of physics, this is pretty somewhat well understood, I should say. So
Sure.
say you have the entire universe, and all of a sudden, over an amount of time, all mass and all energy is gone, and there's nothing that we could look at and say, okay, there's something there. But there is something that's actually still there, which is the properties or the way the quantum field works. And if if you were able to be in that position and you had the right tools, we could see that the quantum, the principles of quantum mechanics are still functioning the way they should. There's just no matter or energy for it to do anything.
You're talking heat death of the universe?
That's right. I've heard that narrative before of the expanding and having it has its finite time of it.
By the way, gravity connects things. Like you have the solar system that hold it, what you have, like the planets held together by gravity in the solar system. That one thing so the solar system is identified as a thing. It held together by gravity. It's connected by gravity.
Well,
and we're connected.
general...
Our cells are connected by gravity.
We're all one.
By magnitude.
It's a little bit
by general relativity, everything is connected to gravity. Everything. No matter how small, there is always gravitational pull of everything
I guess even with the expansion overcoming gravity, it's still affected by gravity. It's just too weak to overcome whatever repulsive force it is.
Yeah, I mean that this idea of everything as gravity, I mean that's settled. There's no question there.
Yeah.
Does anyone know
if you displace space-time, you are in fact making a gravitational well with whatever matter is displacing that space-time.
Yep.
That made me think of,
there is no place where there is no curvature.
And that connection makes so that connection itself is a thing in not being separate from it's as one depending on your perspective.
What is the smallest level that we can measure electric charge?
Electric charge.
You're talking electromagnetism?
Yeah, when the discussion about gravity made me think about.
I think it's the level of the atom, right? Well, actually, no. The electron, proton, and neutron. I
The
think
quarks. I think. I mean, I think quarks.
You think
can
it's
still.
quarks?
Yeah, I think so.
Is this the upwards and downward spin that we talk of, or whatever it is?
I think
within
so.
the quarks.
I'm just fuzzy on quarks,
because polarity, anything that has polarity has the potential for an electric charge.
And you're
Polarity
saying
is straight. This specifically refers to electromagnetism.
and that pull of electromagnetism makes a thing. It's connected through magnetism.
Yeah,
At that
through
level, is that like
electromagnetism. Yeah.
the force that's like? Does it equate to what we would call mass, or is it something more that is missing?
But yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we'd look at it like it was massless, but there's mass there. Yeah.
We're not this
The
far
forces
yet.
within the nucleus. The forces within the nucleus, or the protons, neutrons.
Yeah. I mean, because we definitely know there's mass in protons and neutrons.
Oh yeah. But what we call mass would possibly be measurable in some other way that we would call energy, or in some other form, right?
Yeah.
They
exactly.
are equal in some sense.
Yep. Yeah,
How do they measure that?
Even,
Is it just the
even
effect they
photons
have?
technically have mass, right?
Yeah, they have
That's like
zero
something.
rest mass, which doesn't make any sense because photons always move. They cannot
Never
exist
rests.
in the
Ain't no rest for the wicked.
Yes, so that's the thing. Like, I don't know. In science, people say photons are massless because it's just easier, and the math works. But truly,
if they had no mass.
It does have mass.
Yeah,
they do have mass. Yeah.
If they hadn't had any mass, then the generality never would be proven because there would be no gravitational lensing.
Exactly.
So the forces that are there between things creates a thing because they're connected through force. So they're not really separate from each other.
The explanation I've heard for photons is that they just all their inertia is counted in the speed that they have. They have the same. Would you call it inertia?
Well, yeah, the way I believe into it and see it is that there is basically just two things that are like complete opposites of each other. It's space and energy, and energy is a point feature. It has a velocity and it has a coordinate, the location, but it doesn't have volume.
Yeah,
And space has volume, it doesn't move, and it just have a tensor, basically, like it bends in the presence of energy. Those two things and these interactions make up everything. And every part of your molecules and your atoms of your body and the table and all the stuff that around you, everything moves with the speed of light. The difference is only the trajectory.
Is there any other way to? Oh yeah. What did you say? What did you want to say?
I was just going to say real quick. I mean, to figure out the mass of anything, if you can figure out how much energy it has, divide that by the speed of light squared, and you get the mass. It's going to be
exactly.
tiny number. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, is there any other way to measure the curvature of space without measuring the curvature of light beams? Is space actually a clear concept without talking about the I guess you'd call it quantum fluctuations and light beams and photons? What is space actually? Is there a more clear way to define space, or Does that question even make sense?
There is no set answer for that right now. There is several theories. There are several projects to like define it better or see it in another way and see if it's like
Yeah, that's what I suspected.
consistent. But we are
If it
just
was-
technologically are limited in order to explore that this way, because like the concept, the scientific consensus is that space and time are the same thing. Like it's
yeah,
a
exactly.
unified thing.
But
Between
that's very
matter, between
interesting.
matter though.
But what
I did
is
read it.
if time is a measure of change in
Of
matter,
matter.
and time is equal to space, how do you differentiate energy from space then?
Don't ask me. I think
Wait, I'm
that
not sure. I'm not sure it's safe to say that time is equal to space.
again,
Well,
like I think that time is an illusion because time doesn't exist. What exists is the
Well,
rate of
time
change,
is
the rate at which energy moves.
the bending of the light
That's
is the
reasonable,
gravity
but-
pull. There's no separation between the two objects between each other. They're connected through gravity. It depends.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, there's
you know,
actually
all
four
things
forces, but yeah,
are connected through
gravity's one.
force, and they're not really separate from each other.
There might be a
And
fifth force actually. But
what you're seeing with the bending of light is is a connection between the two is a connection of subjects being connected to each other,
Well,
because
the
they have
bending.
all there's forces between all things have gravity, and they have
Oh yeah.
they have a pull, so they're not really separate. They're of one. And if you come down to molecules, they're separate, but they're not, because they're held together through a force of magnetism.
That doesn't
So
mean
nothing's
they're not
really separate.
Well, even the magnetism and the strong
It's-
nuclear force and the weak nuclear force is still under question, because maybe, perhaps, they're not separate forces. Maybe soul gravity, just the complex structure of subatomic geometry makes up those forces, and we describe them as forces, but it's actually just gravitational interactions within a complex system. And that interaction just holds stuff together and balances out. Because, like, again, there is I don't remember what the principle is called.
And the connection of that force is a thing. It makes it a thing.
Like,
Yeah,
right?
there is gravity, but there is also a principle by which 2 points of energy cannot occupy the same space at the same moment.
Yeah, and Nivek, think about it like this. Think about like a boat on the ocean that's moving through waves. Just because that boat is being held up by its buoyancy and it's reacting to the waves does not make those two things one. You know what I mean? Like there is differentiation between stuff in the universe.
it's
You
true.
know,
That's what we're doing. We're
we can
separating,
make
but
a
we're connecting as well.
Yeah, but
but
point.
you're saying everything's one, and I'm saying no, it's not one. There's these
No,
separate things that interact.
I'm saying nothing, and I'm saying connection and not connection does exist and do exist. That's what it seems like. I can't make it. I'm not coming to a conclusion. I can't come to a conclusion of things being separate, and I can't make a conclusion of things not being separate from each other, based off of force.
What you're describing is a relation between objects.
Yeah.
And you can arbitrarily draw lines around clusters of objects that relate and just call that a thing.
Okay.
But there is a fundamental like discreteness to reality, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As far as
because that's the
all the
only
evidence
way
we have is right now. Yeah.
the only way any geometry can happen is by discrete connections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to, in order to rationalize, make connections between things in subsets and separate.
Well, it would be difficult to see.
To reason.
It
That's
would
how
be
you
difficult
reason,
to
right?
reason in the world if you see everything as individual and unique objects.
You can't see everything as one. I mean, I don't know.
You have to organize and generalize and group stuff together by similar properties.
in order
Right, and
to
that's and even that,
reason.
like you don't actually have to do that, but in terms of the way we've evolved to conserve energy, our brains are they rely on taking shortcuts by grouping things um, in order to efficiently process information.
Okay, so things are very complicated, so we have to break the complications down in subset groups
Yeah,
in
it
order
could
to
be
get
that
an
we have to think
understanding.
about every yeah, it could be that we have to think about every particle interaction
I
all
see.
at one time, but it's like that would be insane.
And connect them together to get an understanding of in reasoning, because you can't
Right.
just see all things as one thing's one shot, because wouldn't be able to navigate. You have to break things down in subset
Yeah,
groups. And
like by definition, like any kind of like simulation or like computation that takes into account an entire system, it must be larger than that system
so it's kind
in
of like
order to comprehend it.
digesting food.
I
You
don't
have
know
to
about
break
that.
it. Well, because you have to break
Humanity,
it. You have to break it down.
imagine.
I
You have to break things down,
I'm
and
thinking.
in order to process, in order to get understanding of things.
Imagine
I'm saying
the magnitude
if you
of
if you want
simplification
to
of
compute,
humanity.
yeah. So the issue is if you want to run a computation on a system of particles, and you don't want to generalize anything, you want to actually take into account every single particle individually, then you run into the problem of memory. Like you have to maintain the state of each particle at every point, and
Well, there's a
so
point where
like
you
every
don't go
frame.
that point. There's a point where you don't go to the point of understanding of going to each particle individually. You lump to a you lump things up to a certain point of a subset group, and then you take it from there and identifying that subset group as a thing.
Yeah,
And that thing that you identify as something, you take that factor of one thing and a factor of another thing, and you bring them together in equating them together in order to have an idea of causality of
yeah. I think I know what you're saying. Yeah,
in order to get understanding. So you break things down in order to, that's why I said eating, in order to ingest it in getting in order to be able to form an understanding.
right. Yeah. I suppose. Yeah, there's an analogy there. Um, but yeah, the issue is like the only reason categories are a thing for us as thinkers is just because there's no way we could compute anything realistically in our environment. We couldn't make assessments without generalizing to categories. So
Yeah, try
Okay,
to
so
compute every blade of grass.
yeah, I mean beyond that,
it'll just be
every single
grass.
atom, like imagine so like for every atom, or not even atom, for every particle, subatomic particle in the universe or in your environment, you would have to you'd have to be able to maintain like the state of that in memory for each reference frame of time across the entire process you're trying to measure. That's just the memory constraints. Then you have to like manipulate those and run like theoretical computations on those. And now we're talking exponential size.
Okay, can I say
So
one thing? So sometimes for an issue, in order to get understanding, you have to either break down and come into a conclusion and cause and effect of what developed that problem in order to get an understanding of it, or you have to expand in grouping things together in subset groups of information on a more broader scale, and add
yeah,
those things together, add those subset factors together in cause and effect in order to get an
yeah,
understanding of outcome.
right. Yeah, cause and effect's super interesting because like that's sort of what you're computing with your brain. Um, and
Your reasoning.
it's interesting because like from a physics perspective, all you're really doing is like making connections
Between matter.
between patterns that emerge within this like entropic process. Like like for example, I've heard the example of an egg being dropped on the ground. You see an intact egg, and it is dropped onto the ground, and it is scrambled all over the place. And mentally, the only reason why you could determine the cause and effect is because you saw a moment of order, and then subsequently, in a different time reference frame, you see that order break down into chaos through the scrambling of the egg, and you kind of draw the connection of like we're
you'll
observing.
equate to this.
Yeah, like the
So
notion of the
it's
arrow
pretty
of
much
time
math. It's
emerges
like
from
this
that.
plus this equals that.
Not quite. It's not equality. It's more like, I guess it sort of answers the question of like, why don't we perceive time running backwards? Like why do we see time running this direction instead of the other direction?
How is it not equality if it's two things that equal one thing?
Because what we're I mean, it depends on what you're trying to equate.
Those two things are separate. You're adding them together,
Probably
and they will
closer
equal.
to a function.
Oh, I see. A function. I see. Okay. Yeah. You can kind of describe it as a physics equation.
You just basically pick an x and you see how x changes over time.
Right, but so the thing with like the physics equation there is as you change t for time, you end up with like as t increases, the entropy of a system increases, and so what you're doing is you're drawing connections between states of lower entropy to states of higher entropy, comparing those. And that's why the arrow of time feels like the arrow of time. Because otherwise, there's no reason why time runs in one direction and not the other, perceptually.
Oh, time. Okay. Time
It
doesn't go backwards.
Yeah, well, it could be theoretically, it could be that we experience time going in the other direction. And in a sense, we kind of do. But
we have long discussions
if you
about
flip the
time,
way you
by
think
the
about
way,
it.
because we have arguments that it's about perspective.
I don't know.
And you can
saying.
Well, like you people can live in different frames of time in knowing what to expect. So a hurricane coming, I see it coming, and the person that doesn't, they live in two different frame, and they go about living their lives in two different references of time. One's more of the present, and one's more of a different time.
So yeah, the question that what I'm saying like answers, like the thing I'm trying to answer is how do you connect the state of energy and matter at t equals 1, and compare how do you compare that to t equals 2, and why do we experience time sequentially like that, and how do we understand sequences of times? Like how do the time frames relate to each other? And the relation is simply the emergence of entropy. It's this process of entropy that we're measuring mentally. We have like a biological clock that does that.
You say time don't go backwards, but the light that hits your eyes is the past, and
well,
that's not time going. That's not time going backwards. That's your perception of. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
so that is true.
If I
That is
experience
true,
something
Nivek.
before
So
you do, I'm living more in the present, and if you're living,
Nivek, hold on. If you see light on a tree, you do know that the light comes from the sun, and we've got like a 7-minute delay roughly before the photons that come off the sun hit that tree, which then that tree itself releases photons of whatever it's made up of, which determines the color that gives off once the photons hit it. That doesn't mean you're going back in time. That's not.
The tree absorbs every photon that isn't the colors you see, right?
What you experience of the environment is your experience of time, right?
it's always in the past. Like everything that you experience in the environment, like the same thing with like sound waves. So somebody, you can go to the Grand Canyon and yell and you can hear it echo back to you. That doesn't mean there's anything weird about time travel. What it is what you're hearing is you made a sound that then makes ripples in the atmosphere. Those ripples go and hit a wall of rock and then radiate back to you again.
The past,
So it
present,
says
and future are all happening simultaneously, depending on perspective.
No. It's because simultaneous infers that like you're
depending
only
on
looking at one
perspective of
time
frame
frame.
of reference.
It's not quite like that. I think it might be a language thing that's the problem, but
Seems like it.
But the thing is, like what I'm trying to get at is like when we think about the universe,
I'm not coming to a conclusion. I'm just asking questions.
Well, you're stating a lot of things, Nivek. You're not asking a whole lot of questions.
Okay. Can I ask you this? If you have light from another star hit your eyes, you're experiencing the past of what happened in that time, but the present of what's happening then, and you of that planet and you now are different.
Right. Yeah. It just
in
like
time.
how you calculate those things just depends on what reference frame you're talking about. But if you're talking about your own personal reference frame, then it gets kind of simpler. But yeah, it changes if you move the reference frame somewhere else. But in any case,
I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of time.
In any case,
I have a question. Do you want to finish?
Well, I can. I was trying to get at like because I've done some reading about why the arrow of time feels the way it does, and I was trying to answer that question essentially. But it doesn't really matter if you guys don't, would rather move on.
Well, the reason why it feels that way is because we have memory and we have predictive, we have imagination.
But yeah, but how does prediction work? The question is, how does prediction work, right? And
it uses memory in order to make prediction.
Yeah, but what is memory? So the problem that I'm trying to get at is like, how do you define all that? And I think that my understanding, and I could be slightly mischaracterizing it, but my understanding is that the reason why the past feels like fixed and concrete and like finalized is because we're coming from a state of higher order and we're moving to a state of lower order through entropy. And the reason why the future feels fuzzy and like not yet real is because there's so many possibilities that emerge, as you increase entropy. There's so many possibilities for the state of the universe. You can't quite settle on it until you move into the specific time frame, and that's what the present is.
Well, the same
we're talking
entropy.
We were talking about relations between matter before, right? What were
trying to find
before?
You're trying to find order in a state of entropy at t equals +1, essentially. And it's hard to do because there's a lot of like indeterminate possibilities.
Well, we determine it by our perception, and then we memorize it, and then we make a prediction of what is probably going to happen next. The same entropy works on your memory, and it also becomes fuzzy over time.
Totally,
it's
yeah.
not
I'm
really
saying
solid.
that it doesn't. Yeah, we're part of the universe, but what I'm saying is like, as the universe progresses, like the reason why your memory can like in a way store the information that it has received is because we've captured some like order. Like there's like there's a set of possibilities that is always at like t equals +1, like n+1, and on into the future. There's so many like branching possibilities, and as we step through the function of space-time, we increase t, and then those possibilities collapse to a certain degree. We start walking that tree of possibilities, and as those states become concrete, now we have something to memorize, and so we can kind of store that, and that's sort of what's going on.
Well, that's the thing. It's the difference between how you approach it, because like my own idea is that time doesn't exist. Basically, like the only time that exists is right now, this moment.
Yeah, when
Everything
I say
else is the
time,
Time is an emergent property, is what you're saying.
yeah, I'm not saying that time is an existential thing. I'm just saying that like at discrete units of like the state of all of matter and energy as it evolves, like we could just slice it up into time arbitrarily, and as we step through that, there's like a function of like I, well, it's weird because like from a pure physics standpoint, there's no reason why you can't like step back through time, theoretically, right? Like you can just subtract from t
Okay,
and find a
can I
different state.
summarize a bit? Can I summarize a bit? So
But
first we're
the
talking
reason,
about
well, I just want to say the only reason why, the only difference between t equals n minus 1 and t equals n plus 1, the only difference between the states of the universe at those two times is that well, there's the obvious, like the state is different, but how is it different is one is more orderly and one is more chaotic.
Can I summarize a bit? At first, we're talking about identifying identifying thing and nothing, and it's like, well, we take things subset, we group them together in a causality outcome, and breaking things down is why we do that. It's a form of reasoning, and you're saying that causality outcome is time of predicting, right? Of outcome, and then I think you said something about like, well, it's about moving forward and time can't move backwards, and then we got into discussion of perception of time. Then and that
Yeah,
we kind of didn't want to
predictions.
get we didn't want to get into that, so we just said,
No,
okay,
I think you're onto something. I think like where prediction comes into play is that as the universe progresses, it leaves an imprint on our memory. Like we're identifying a pattern, and then we are storing that as time progresses, and then we are constantly taking in new like data points,
okay.
and then we're comparing it to the ones that were stored.
So matter and time is the same thing, and
yeah,
they're
it kind of is.
they're connected, and
all I'm saying is that time is not its own thing. Time is literally just like it's
the
the
change
universe
between matter.
changing. It's a measurement of change in the universe. But the reason why we have this notion of this arrow of time, like it always moves forward, is because of this entropic principle. It's like the only difference between the past and the future is that the past is more orderly and the future is more disorderly, more entropic.
I see.
And
because the past
our
happened.
perception, the feelings that we have about the future and the past are like those feelings emerge, that they emerge as properties of a universe being more orderly or more chaotic.
So you're equating orderly with chaotic in order to get an idea of what will happen, because you can look in the past and kind of predict what will happen in the future, but you can't make an exact prediction because it's chaotic, right?
Yeah. That's
so
pretty much it.
You take the past and you take the information of it, you group it together and cause and effect of what happened, and therefore, based on that understanding, you would do things through prediction of what will happen as best as you can. So you're
It's
gathering
kind
as
of
much information around the environment in the present and the past in order to predetermine what will happen in the future in anticipating that thing what will happen in navigating the environment that you're
right.
in
So the
order to
question is
survive.
like, how do you get that? Like, how do you get that from going from order to chaos? Like how there's
Wait, by the way, can I say one thing? You
yeah,
looking out in having a deep understanding of what will happen in the future is you looking forward into time.
kind of, yeah. But I was just going to explain why it's possible to have predictions at all in that context, and part of it is or like the foundation of it is that um, in the overall like universal principle of entropy, we live in a pocket where um, a pocket of the universe where things can occasionally go from more chaotic to more orderly. It's like a localized version where entropy is reversed in certain cases. That's why we're able to build structures, for example.
Children.
You what?
Have children.
Yeah,
Children is the
totally.
one of the best examples of reverse entropy.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what we're doing is when we make a prediction, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, there's this repeating pattern of like past
Information.
orderly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an orderliness um of matter
So
and energy in the past. And then what we're doing is saying, okay, we can measure those states relative to time, and we can kind of extrapolate forward about future orderly states.
and
And
you
so
take that
that would be
information and
impossible.
you confirm that with the present. You get what I'm saying? So it's kind of like in order
Right.
to get an understanding of where you are in the present,
But
you
let me
go back in
finish.
time and you gather information.
But let me finish. Which it would be impossible to make predictions about the future unless there are states of the future that are also orderly in predictable ways, right? So um, we like if it just turned out that every instance of order always like devolved into chaos everywhere, then I don't think prediction would be possible because you couldn't have future states that add order, you know? And I think that's sort of necessary for prediction.
So in the past, the matter of information, the factors you gather in, and as much as possible, and processing that information in order to get an understanding of the present and where you are, and therefore, with that confirmation, idea of what will happen in anticipation, in predictive outcome of cause and
Yeah,
effect of the information
yeah,
that you took in.
it's sort of like moving along a two-dimensional graph and realizing that you're along a curve and finding the next point on the curve. You can kind of predict the next point on the curve based on prior trends.
So how much we can gather the past and the present, you could more likely have an idea what will happen in the future.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's if you process. That's if you process. That's if you gather enough and you
Well,
rationalize it properly enough.
for certain systems, yeah, not all
Yeah.
systems, Nivek.
Yeah, that's where chaos theory comes into play, where like things get exponentially complex and disorderly. If you're in that kind of scenario, like prediction becomes impossible very quickly. But in places where we can find repeating orderly patterns across time frames, you can manage to do prediction because the bounds of the problem are much smaller in that scenario.
Okay, so the matter that you're taking in, the change in that matter is time.
Yeah, like imagine, okay, so in math, in like linear algebra, there are certain kinds of equations that you can solve where you put a single input on the left side of the equation, but there's two possible values for the variable on the right side of the equation, you know? Imagine imagine a scenario where there's like a million possible answers on the right side of the equation, and that's kind of how it gets as you become less orderly and more chaotic. There just become so many possible answers, unless you knew the entire state of the universe all at once. But that's like, you'd have to have a supercomputer that's larger than the universe in order to compute that.
So you're factoring in the past of what happened of information.
I'm factoring in what?
Cause you're factoring in the information of the past. You're factoring the past and the information of it, of what has happened, and cause and effect of what will happen in explaining the present that you're in now.
I'm not quite sure that it works that way.
The past explains the present. It makes you understand. In order to get an understanding of the current time that you're in, the past can do that.
I want to see. It's been between Scientific and Nivek for a good minute here. Is anybody else?
Okay.
Dow, Villain, Doolittle, Divine, Steek. What do you guys got?
Yeah, jump in.
I've been sitting on a separate point that I didn't want to change the subject without letting everyone finish first.
Well, if anyone wants to, if anyone has any pressing things they want to say about the current topic, I would say go for it. But otherwise, I'm totally down to jump into something else.
Yeah, Dow, what's up, my man?
Yeah.
Well, nothing much. We could keep talking about nothing. That's always fun.
Yeah.
Well,
we're looping all of that together. We're looping in, and we went from nothing to something, and then saying that we're equating matter, and then we went into time, and
yeah, we can use the experience we got from the
predicting.
discussion to make a prediction of the conversation that we probably won't come to anything interesting.
Can I loop what I was saying back into nothingness? I just, because the reason why I think it's important to understand like the process of time and the arrow of time and entropy is because I think it relates to this notion of categories and structure. I think as things are more orderly, they're more easily structured, like into categories, and you end up with like it becomes harder to fit things into groups. You end up having more groups over time as entropy increases, you know? I think that's sort of the direction I wanted to go with it. Like logically, it's harder to draw boundaries as entropy increases. It's harder to figure out what the boundaries are. And so it kind of relates to category theory, which kind of relates to the notion of nothingness with like empty sets and that kind of stuff.
Well, I do have a question, Dow. What's your opinion on nothingness? Do you think nothing exists? My personal opinion is I don't think that's a possibility. There has to be something.
I'm of the opinion that we define nothingness in such a way that it generally is something. So we'll say nothingness is the negation of all things, but I would say that the negation of all things is in itself something. So true nothingness would neither be things or the negation of them. It would be, in my opinion, equal with infinity and or whatever you want to call just whatever set you're bracketing. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and to me, like my personal opinion, there's infinity doesn't exist. It's just a tool that is used to in like math and stuff to explain or to try and use in specific equations. It's never used in physics. Infinity wouldn't make any sense.
It's not a quantifier, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah, it shows up. Infinities tend to appear in what we do, but it's more like it makes it
Yeah.
untranslatable.
Yeah, well,
Is that
typically,
infinite
like
regress?
if you have something in the world of physics and you're doing your test and it comes out to be infinity, you know, right off the bat you did something wrong somewhere.
Well,
divided
that
by
or you have
zero.
like an asymptote toward infinity, which is more like an algorithmic step thing.
Yeah, but
exactly.
then you never actually have the infinity. You just bracket it
Exactly.
and say that's infinity.
Yep.
So this means that everything that is so this means that everything that is even conceivable either exists somewhere between nothing and infinity.
Well, I tend to put one on that same line too. So nothingness would be equal to infinity, and like we just said, infinities exist within brackets. That's kind of what we do. So the concept of a one is just like that bracket we put around an infinite set, because between 1 and 0 there's infinite uncountable numbers, and we just kind of use 1 as like a bench point to just mean here.
But
A good example.
that actually, like, irrational numbers actually do have function, and we know that we know that irrational numbers are real. Like pi, we know pi is real. It's still an irrational number, but we do know it's real.
Yeah, it's irrational because it's some random point in between a 1 and a 0.
Irrational because it can only ever truly be stated in an equation. Once you put the number down, the point never ends. It just keeps going on. You know, it's
Yeah, the way I look at it is infinity doesn't really appear outside of like an equation like relationship type thing.
Exactly.
Like you can't just like instantiate an infinity, but what you can do is define a curve that trends toward infinity as some reference variable increases or decreases or something like that.
Yeah.
But what the only real numbers are like actual numbers that you plug in. You're just describing a trend, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and pretty much. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Pi is real, and there's probably a few other ones
There's a lot. There's like
that we measure.
like the golden ratio.
We don't know what that what that is, as far as I can tell, but it's something.
The Fibonacci sequence is what it is. The Fibonacci sequence.
1 1 2 3 5 8 13
And that's
21.
That's what all fractals are based on. You know.
Scott, what's infinite regress when we discuss religion? You're always saying something like a thing behind.
Infinite regress is the idea of like the problem that people always have on the religious side is they want to say all of a sudden, okay, now God. But if we're looking at things that calls a relationship, there always has to be something before. There can never truly be a self-cause cause, and the idea of a self-cause cause is something that's philosophical. It has nothing to do with what's actual, you know, what people in the realm of science deal with. It's
right. And you keep going on and on.
Yep. Yeah, so there is like the idea is like, oh, all of a sudden what gets this far, and then it's got to be God at this point. That's the problem with it.
And then when you get to that point, then you got to go beyond that point and say, well, there's got to be a God beyond that point. And
there's got to be a God that made God, and a God that made that God, and a God that made that God, and it just never ends.
That's what happened at first with the lightning God, right?
Basically, either you agree,
and then the Mars God or whatever.
Either you agree that something has to be first, and it can be anything, including God, but not necessarily, or you're going to stick to the line of causality forever, which is infinite regress.
Yeah.
So the area you have, like what you can do is you can say, okay, there's a fundamental axiom that the reality exists. That's all. That's as far as you need to go. Because it's an axiom. That's something that we have to take as an axiom. We can't actually go further than that from everything that I've ever seen.
Speaking of, I watched a video today, or was listening to a video today between William Lane Craig and Sir
Oh my
Roger
goodness.
Penrose. There's
That
a
motherfucker.
Yes, I've
Sorry.
seen that.
I know, yeah, but they get into this idea of the infinite regress and some common misconceptions about time and stuff like that. It's really interesting. I'm gonna drop it in the chat, just if anyone is
I
curious.
remember first listening to William Lane Craig, and I thought, okay, this is at least the most interesting Christian debater I've heard up until this point. And then I listened a bit more to him, and I just got more and more and more frustrated, and I couldn't stand him. Like, he cannot move away from his own arguments and see stuff from an actually objective point of view.
Yeah, he's not somebody that comes into a conversation based on good faith. He's there to push his agenda.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
extremely true. And
Yeah,
I saw a video of him, like,
I hate that.
someone praised him to be the most challenging Christian debater to actually debate from an atheist point of view, and he's so proud of it. It's fucking insane.
I like to think that his entire career is built on the premises of the universe began to exist, and everything that has a cause, or everything that exists has a cause. And if any of those premises are false,
That
are proven
explains
false,
how
then his
Jesus
career
got
breaks
his
down.
So where did the dinosaurs come in? That go back millions of years.
Did you say
into
divine
the,
dinosaurs? Did
No,
you
I'm
say
saying
divine dinosaurs? Man, that sounds awesome, dude.
Maybe we should make a movie.
What if the dinosaurs had a god?
Godzilla.
No, I'm just saying
the giant T-Rex in the sky.
What if they actually had those discussions, and that's why they died out? Actually,
Yeah, they did until the fucking meteor hit them. It's the second coming.
well, I know that.
That's a good
That's
point.
very
It was the
conspiracy
second coming.
Did
you hear-
dinosaurs did that creator?
Did you hear one of the theories that Neil deGrasse Tyson was on Joe Rogan? Did you hear like one of the theories that he heard about like how we don't live in a binary system like most other systems, and we just have one star, and so there's these odd pulls and pushes when it comes to like the Kuiper Belt and like Neptune and stuff like that. So one of the theories was, and mathematically actually kind of works out, was we could have a dead sun out there in a way or something like that never really like sparked.
Yeah, or red dwarf.
Yeah,
Like some
kind
sort
of like that.
Jupiter-like thing.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
like it kind of, and it never. So our sun is kind of like kind of eating it in a lot of ways, but and we call this, and it was proposed called Nemesis, and it comes through our solar system from time to time, disrupts the Kuiper Belt, sends a wave of fucking asteroids and shit like that towards all the planets, which is what's leading to the extinction events. Like, ooh, what the fuck? No thanks.
Well, there's also the argument to be made that the fact that we have Jupiter and Saturn that's protected us from so many of those bombardments. That's why we're still around today, because they are catchers of like rogue comets and ships, because they're massive enough to be able to attract them. Is basically the idea.
They showed it last time, a comet hitting Jupiter, right? Like a huge comet.
What I'm
Or it's an
gathering
asteroid.
is Mars isn't enough. We need to go to Alpha Centauri.
Let's go to the moon first, okay? Let's go to the moon first.
Once you're in space, you're good. Stop putting yourself on a planet.
If we cannot colonize
space, man.
If we cannot colonize moon, then forget about Mars. Seriously. Like, moon is very convenient. It's partly protected from solar radiation.
That's a good point.
If you can't make a sustainable fucking city on this, if you can't make a sustainable city on this planet, we're in trouble. Which means we're already in trouble.
Well, one problem is that neither the moon nor Mars have a strong like magnetic field that typically protects you from all kinds of cosmic events. And the nice thing about Mars, though, is that we could pretty safely like nuke the planet into having a magnetic field like we
let's
have on Earth.
fucking nuke it.
Yeah,
Man, I don't know, because to get a magnetic field, you have to get the core spinning. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if like a nuke is just going to all of a sudden kick off a core spinning, unless we're talking
a lot
about
of
that
nukes.
movie. That
You
movie,
have
The
better
Core.
chance.
I mean,
You
do you
have
guys
better
remember that
chance.
movie? Do you guys remember that movie, The Core, where they make the machine, they go down they line up like atomic bombs to get the core of the Earth spinning
That's
again?
Ridiculous.
Shit.
The ignorance
I like how
astounds me, but it's still fun.
I like how the answer is, well, we got a lot of nukes. Yeah, because we always come up with good ideas as humans that have no liability. It's like, oh, I guess we shouldn't have blasted that fucking thing into oblivion. Whoops.
Yeah,
We also
Alpha Centauri. Like, I mean, you do realize it's going to be like hundreds a year trip. You know,
hundreds, thousands.
We need to master
hundreds.
Cryogenic preservation of humans.
See, I don't think we'll necessarily have cryogenic. I think what we're going to have to do is build a
generation ship.
Yeah. So people are going to have kids and still be
Called
like
a seed. Yeah,
basically a
So
flying
it's not about
city.
traveling to Alpha Centauri; it's about living in space, pretty much.
Yeah, you ever see those creatures that like get like for like space, like sci-fi creatures of just like, you know, weird type alien creatures that just go from planet to planet consuming and consuming. That's us. That's us. So we gotta do that. We gotta do that thing.
Have to.
I think the more likely scenario is creating a self-modifying AI system that can basically survive on any planet without an atmosphere.
So you say that? Did you see the TV show? The Ridley Scott one, where it was the two androids. These two androids go to a planet, and then the androids have the systems in them to like. No, it's not Prometheus. It was on HBO. But these two androids go and they give birth to 6 kids. Yeah, raised by wolves. It's that exact idea that you're talking about. So the idea was like you make androids that then go and take this genetic material, and it doesn't matter how long it takes those androids to get there. Like once they land, that they can gestate the children and then try to start building a society from there. That could be a possibility.
That's true. Well, the theory is that VR will get so real that we won't visit any planets. It'll just be too dangerous to visit a planet, right? You just send, your probe down there, and then you experience through virtual reality out the probe. You can smell, see, taste, touch. You can do it all, but you're not physically there. You're not harming your brain.
I'm more interested in
telescopes. I would say that the bigger point is to get human genetic material in the form of living human beings on other planets if we want to continue this journey of what it is to be human.
Oh, so we can put trash on those planets too? Yeah, that's a great idea.
Absolutely, dude. You're a bit cynical with this, aren't you, Grim?
I work in risk and liability, and I work on some of the largest problems on the planet, and it is not pretty. It's kind of fortunate that we now have information of the internet, and then we get to find out like, it is kind of a big deal what the fuck we're doing, and it is kind of a problem, and we don't have unlimited life and unlimited resources in all of this planet. We are fucking it up really bad.
The problems that we're having right now and that we're contributing to, they aren't going to go on forever. I mean, we will get to a point. Like I've made this point before. I think before we can even try to get onto other planets and start terraforming, we need to learn how to terraform our own planet first. So that's going to be step one. Is once we can start doing that.
That's what I work on as well. Carried out. They'll probably be simultaneously carried out, though. People will still do whatever it takes to other planets.
Look, people don't think about sustainability. In fact, even sustainability itself is a hard, really hard concept, because can we achieve true sustainability? It's never really been done. We are filtering device like machines, if you think of it that way, we filter things. But at the same time, we have a more need to care about ourselves and the collective, or to take on the virtues of others when it comes to like bettering your environment. So ultimately, it has been the modus operandus to leave more trash behind than to pick up. It has been the modus operandus to exploit resources rather than replenish them, and to consume rather than to sustain. And so those are the habits that need to change, and I don't see them changing very quickly. I see this generation kind of taking the step, but if you had to say, hey, where are we at? I would say we are in its infancy, and it is to the point where it's reaching critical mass of, if we are on this track for the next, let's say 50 years, we're going to see some global issues.
The question always seems like the quest for sustainability always in the long run seems to be how well we use the energy that we always get from the sun daily.
Hey, don't you think
There's
fission, or we just had
no
fission,
rational
nuclear
way to-
fusion, baby. Woo!
And don't you think it's more important to build an insane large telescope to observe the universe than traveling it?
I think both. I don't think you weigh one over the other. I think you want to know where you're going before you just head out. So
It's like a communication device. It's kind of like 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 a telephone.
it's an observation device, not a communication device.
We can transmit,
it's
though.
only
We can
go,
transmit
only go
radio
one
waves. We can transmit a lot of things.
It's a communication device, yeah.
But I mean, like, we're right now we're building
Radio
the
waves
ELT. We're building the ELT telescope, the extremely large telescope.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to see, like, you're supposed to be able to see a planet. No, the James Webb's supposed to be able to see life on a planet.
Yeah, we got some large stuff there. But when you want to
launching it this year,
the best way to communicate would be
But I
high
mean,
speed light.
forget about communicate.
Really
wouldn't it be good to observe life on
well,
the
the
planet?
problem with those forms of communication, whether you're talking about radio waves or high speed lights, is say we send off a radio signal right now. What are the chances
You
that
don't want to
somebody on
communicate. Why would you
another
want to
planet?
communicate?
Hold on, man. Let me
You don't
fucking
want to know
finish,
the answer
dude.
to that. You don't want to know the answer to that, Scott.
So if we send out radio signals right now, even let's take the entire history of humanity sending out radio. What is the likely chance that somebody on another planet that they were pointing directly at us and got that signal in that 50 years or 60 years that time passed? It's really, really small.
So if you actually Google like how far radio signals have gone, it's actually quite pathetic. It's really pathetic how far they've gone.
They dissipate from background radiation.
No, it's not even that. It's the longevity of our radio signals over the past 100 years. Have gone fuck all when it comes to distance. So I'm not even talking about. I'm not even talking about.
But the reason they don't go that far, Grim, is because of cosmic background radiation. So
no. I mean,
so
like
once.
It's not even like how far they've gone. It's just like the fact that space is so huge, right? They haven't even reached another system yet. That's the problem.
But radio waves have gone past other stars and other systems now at this point. But the point I'm making is like that is something else that is actually happening. Is cosmic background radiation is affecting those radio waves. Those waves in and of themselves.
That's not important, though. You don't need to
communicate.
It is. You want to observe.
It is.
It is.
You don't want to talk to.
It's massively important.
We could be picking up radio waves right now, Nivik, and we just wouldn't know because of the cosmic radio wave background. But here's the thing, Scott. The best way to communicate.
My point to that, Graham, was like that's why I was sort of agreeing with you that light is the best way to go about it. But because it doesn't do that. But at the same time, it's the same problem where we shot this message out in light, and they would have just been looking at the right point in their space.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Observing with a telescope is better.
The best way to communicate is to fuck with our sun. Is to literally fuck with our sun. So if you basically put a sail in front of the sun that kind of blocked out, and the part that's not affecting us, and you just did weird shit, right? Like Morse code or mathematical, then if anything is
Something,
looking
yeah,
at our
yeah.
sun, if anything is looking at our light, then it can notice that.
They'll
And
see
it might
those,
be a
yeah.
long time from, but by the time that light hits them, but they're able to look at our sun and go, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look like any fucking planet. That doesn't look like anything. It's like, yes, because we are personally fucking with our sun to say, we are
Yes,
here, we are
yeah.
here. Do we want to do that? Probably not.
That would be
I don't-
insane.
No,
You
we
would
don't
probably
want to do
Yeah.
that.
like
Probably
okay,
not. We don't know what else is out
think,
there, right?
Think about it this way:
You
putting
just want to
something in front of
observe
our
the universe.
sun.
Don't communicate with it.
Think about it this way: putting something in front of our sun implies a directionality to where the signal can go. Like,
Yes, indeed.
I could imagine doing some kind of orbital like sheet that can block the sun,
Kind
but
of,
it's still only in one direction. So if someone was potentially
Well, you
able
do
to
it
see
all
it,
over the place, right? So you do it here for like a couple years, do it here, and you do
no,
something like prime
no,
numbers or something,
no,
and you'd be
no,
like, oh,
no.
made the shape of a
No,
what, made a
no,
shape.
I'm talking about you're on a
what you'd have to
planar
do.
axis.
Yeah. So basically, what you would have to have a ribbon going around the entire sun, and that
In
ribbon
all
if that ribbon
directions.
rotated, yeah,
Oh,
that
that'd be
ribbon
smart. Yeah, that's a
rotated
good
like
idea.
that's like it would
Yeah.
have to just keep doing it forever, but then people could see that, and it wouldn't even
But once
matter.
again,
It wouldn't even matter where you base that rotation off of.
right,
Like, as long as it
Right.
was one ribbon that was point to point at anywhere in the sun, and it was
yeah,
rotating, people would see it.
right. But
That'd be
once again,
great.
you leave the porch light on, you start, doing that, then the
So,
moths and the bears come. So watch your shit.
Scott, don't you think it's more important to build as large telescope as possible, and being able to like how and having the potential to likely observe very well? You know what I mean? I mean, like if you build
That's
build
not
a
for.
telescope large enough to even see life on another planet, that in itself is an achievement.
Yeah,
That
but
might help
that's.
us
I mean,
get to like a
yeah. I
smart way to
mean,
communicate. I don't know.
and we are going to get there. Like, but that
The
any
James Webb
telescope that is
is supposed to be able to
any
do that.
telescope. Hold on. Any telescope that is Earth based, we're not going to be able to get actual images. So, like when you're talking about like James Webb, what they're doing is they're looking at like infrared and all this other
Light.
kind of stuff. If
Yeah,
you
it's all
want an
light
actual
based.
image, you need something like the Hubble telescope, anything that is outside of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere of Earth will you can't feasibly get to the atmosphere of Earth without having certain distortions. Do you know what I mean?
The
Like so,
The
to
James
James
Webb
have
Webb's way
the James
powerful
Webb
than
is out in space.
Hubble. They say that it's potential to see life on a planet.
They're gonna pull the Hubble out of the atmosphere, dude. They're gonna drop it.
It's
Yeah,
a
the James
replacement
Webb.
of the Hubble.
Yeah, they're
oh,
gonna
it's
drop
going to
the Hubble,
replace the
dude.
Hubble.
They're gonna drop the Hubble, and then they're gonna drop. They're thinking about dropping the space station too.
The Hubble's the size of the lens is
Yeah.
the size of a guy. The James Webb's lens is the size of a tennis court.
It's a gold. Like if you look it up, it's like a
Yeah,
like a
I'm
different
looking at it
style.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different style. They're gonna launch this year. They were trying to launch last year, but it got delayed COVID. But so they're gonna launch this year on Halloween, and it's gonna do some really trippy shit. It's got tons of capability, but they're
It's
also thinking
insanely
about
powerful.
Let's
dropping the space
see. So
station,
the
dude.
Hubble Ultra
Crazy.
Deep Field James Webb. What's it? So James Webb can see
What the
200
Hubble can't.
million years. So, but that also doesn't necessarily give you the same kind of capabilities to zoom in on a planet like you would,
It's
like zooming in on a picture to like see any sort of life on the planet. That's
oh
my
yeah, no
point.
fuck
Like,
that noise. That'd be crazy.
these
I watched
telescopes are not
documentary of
used
scientists
for.
on the James
Hold
Webb,
on.
and they say that they're
Nivek.
capable.
Hey, Nivek,
Just
let him
hold on. I
finish.
mean, like these telescopes are used for scientific research, which is not necessarily like the purpose that they're building this for is to understand the cosmos better, not to be able to zoom in onto a single planet and be like, oh, we look, there's deer there, or some shit like that. You know, I mean, like, yeah, you can watch stuff on YouTube that's going to say, oh yeah, with this, and
No,
they're
man.
going to say
The people building it.
they're going to. No, I know, like, dude, listen to me for a fucking second, man. Quit talking over me. Um, what you'll see is like people will make certain statements based on the way they think about science, but then somebody throws a YouTube video together, or they put a article out on the New York Times. But these people are scientifically illiterate, so they just take like what the scientist told them and sort of run with it, make these certain conjectures that don't actually have anything to do with what's really going on in the scientific research.
God, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying that the actual people building the James Webb is who I'm listening to.
Right. So the people that built the James Webb said that they can see infrared on a planet to see habitability of it, but they can't. They're not going to be able to. So as the sun kind of passes through its atmosphere, as the planet goes in front of the sun, we can measure the planet's size, and we can measure what the planet's on based on the light readings that we get back, which is what we do with the Hubble now. However, with this one, we're able to see 100 times better, right, to get more accurate readings and to see farther back. But we're not going to be able to like see a planet. We're still going to have artist renditions when it comes to like looking at a planet and stuff like that. It's only going to be picking up certain types of light, and maybe some cool pictures. It might
The
see some
Hubble,
cool
the
pictures.
Hubble, the Hubble can't
The
pick up
point of it
infrared. The
too.
James Webb can't pick up infrared. Infrared.
Yeah, well, the point
yeah,
of it,
yeah, they
Nivek,
do.
is like it's like you know like God, what's the term? What's the term where you can like a chromograph scale? So
You
where
crom-
basically you can a chromograph, you can see you can determine the composition of like something's atmosphere or like what it's made
That's
of.
what we're
Like
doing now.
we can
Yeah.
shoot a telescope at like the sun, and we know it's made of these specific elements because we can see specific spikes related to the actual frequency of those photons, and the frequency of the photon is based off of the whether it's hydrogen or helium. It's based off the atomic
Oh,
element, and when it's burnt, the light that it gives off. So it's the same way that neon lights work. So you can put neon in a neon light, it comes out red, but then you can also put argon and it comes out purple. Or you can put like this is
All right.
something that's that's what they use that
yeah, you
for, to
mean
try to
spectrograph.
determine
Spectrograph.
spectrograph. Yeah.
It's very sensitive when it comes to infrared and the James Webb. And I was watching. There was a documentary. It's called Into the Unknown, and they were saying that it's so sensitive. If you put a bee on the moon, you can pick the James Webb is powerful enough to pick up the bee.
I don't know if they're going to use it to see a bee on the moon. It would take some extreme calibrations to do that, but
they were showing that a scientist says, "Oh, well, I question. Let me see if I question that." And he was doing all types of math on the board. He's like, "Crap, it was right. It was this award-winning scientist that's heading the James Webb telescope who made that statement." And a scientist.
Let me respond to that.
and
Let me respond to that, Scott. So here's the best way to understand this, Nivik. If we were to look out, right, like we have some air, like if like when we capture things like galaxies, right, and we see these galaxies, we have really cool pictures because we're grabbing large swaths of the night sky, of the night sky, right, and you're seeing this huge swath, so you can see this huge nebula and all that. But if you were to actually look into a planet, right, even though you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, all you would see is dust, because those planets and those things are just surrounded by dust and cloud. There's just really nothing out there to look at individually the way you're talking about, which is why they use infrared, which is why the James Webb Telescope and the Hubble Telescope are calibrated to utilize infrared so that we can just use light scales, kind of what Scott's talking about, and we can go, cool, there's a planet around this size, around this sun, that looks to have this kind of atmosphere. That is the important data and not only that, James Webb is specifically trying to be used to look at what kind of happened more towards the Big Bang, because of how far back it can look into it. But when you're talking about zooming in on like planets and stuff like that, like I said, if you were to use just a telescope and just take the picture for the picture of what it is, you're just going to see a bunch of fucking dust because of what you have to look at like what you have to get through to look at that planet. And it's just, you can't.
The infrared, it being more powerful because it picks up infrared light. It'll pick up the infrared wavelength
got
of an object.
So you're looking so basically you're looking at a punch sheet in a way. It's a digital punch sheet that kind of has these spikes on light waves, and that's what you read. It's not like, oh, look at this picture and look at this planet, like, oh, look at this cool shit. It's like, no, you're just reading lines on a sheet of spikes of light. Like that's kind of, at the end of the day, that's what that thing is going to produce.
Yeah, and the infrared is basically just heat.
It's white.
Well,
It's
yeah.
red. It's white. Red wavelength.
Red wavelengths. That's right, because light's stretched out. Yep.
And heat produces infrared in red wavelength light.
Yeah.
So it's people think, oh, it's just you're just picking up heat, but it's really wavelength light that you're
It's the
picking up.
universe expanding the light itself as the universe expands, and then that light turns into red, and then it goes into ultraviolet, and it goes into this cosmic radio wave background eventually, because the universe has expanded it so thin.
Yeah, and so what you can't pick up in infrared wavelength, you can more get a sharper image because the James Webb is very sensitive to infrared.
Well, you can't pick up an image, like I said, because when you actually look out the night sky and you try to zoom in on something like a planet, it's just going to be covered in dust. You're not going to be able to see through all the dust, so you have to use infrared. You can grab like large pictures of like galaxies and shit, which is pretty cool, but to see through the galaxy would just be all dust. Just too dirty. It's not a clean universe. Sorry. Dirty universe. That's where we ended that one. It's a dirty universe.
Dirty fucking universe.
Nobody's cleaning this shit up. I mean,
it sounds like
what's going
a
on when you need 'em?
Clint Eastwood in space kind of quote, maybe.
You're just leaving a bunch of rocks and dirt around, you sons of bitches.
What do you think about the black hole image?
I think it's amazing that we can predict something like that, and science once again prevails, where we can make a prediction, have it come true, and go, look at that motherfucker. Like, if only Hawking was around, to embrace in his theory. It's cool.
I just
not really his theory, but
one more. I just want to throw out one more future Clint Eastwood quote. All noise, no signal.
You broke up, actually, so that came out terrible.
I said, all noise, no signal.
All noise, no signal.
So how is we able to see a black hole, but we can't see whatever else we want to see in space?
Well,
what did they do? They got all the telescopes together and they pointed at one spot.
No, I think that one was done when we knew we had a clear shot of it after monitoring it for years and years and years, and then I think I don't know exactly how we got. I think it was maybe the Hubble that we used to kind of get to it.
No, I think it was telescopes on the Earth, and they all just pointed in one direction, and they added the data together to get an image.
Yeah, that makes better sense, because it'd be really, really hard to see the black hole, the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. But at the end of the day, I think it's beautiful. I think it's honestly beautiful. Makes sense.
I think that they should turn the entire Earth into one big telescope.
What about nihilism? How do you guys feel about
oh God.
just the belief system that nothing exists, or there is no morality, or there is no this, or there is no that?
Talsu, we've been over this. Nothing doesn't exist. It's just an abstract concept.
Yeah. How do you conclude on what we said so far about the on nothing? What's your view in the conclusion so far, Dalsu?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I agree with you guys. It's essentially up to interpretation. I think the most nothingness-y nothing that we can have is essentially the one that also doesn't have negations. So it's just an undefined sort of everything, nothing unification. Zurich, what do you think? Can nothing exist?
So I just got here, but from that like summation of what you talked about, like that's almost a perfect encapsulation of why I don't like the way we're defining the word exist right now. Because what that is it's a material definition. Because of course you can't find nothing. Like in that sense it is an abstract concept. Because the concept of nothing has to nest within a system in which nothing is essentially irrelevant information or irrelevant stuff to the system.
Bingo.
But
well said.
But of course, I think the word exist has to serve a functional purpose where it's within a system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, we use the word nothing all the time. And in that sense, we act as if it exists. Because we use it functionally constantly. So.
Yeah, it's like you're so fucking biased because you live in a world of potential. You can't say the opposite of like, well, be non-potential, but I physically cannot understand that because I live in a world of potential. I'm forced to my biased nature.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by bias, because you can't really find a world where
Yeah, well, you could be unbiased if you had two examples, right? Well, a universe of potential and a universe not of potential, and you'd be like, oh, okay, well now I'm on, but you're kind of fucked on that one.
It's probably more
akin to
imaginary
without
universe.
potential. You're not gonna find one. So it's like you're not biased just because that thing doesn't exist. That's how the world works.
Yeah, like one will be full of like productive members of society, and a bunch of them will be like stoners playing video games. You'd be like, look, there's a world of nothing, and then there's a world of a bunch of stoners playing video games that are actually a productive member of society. Oh shit.
Oh.
So you're saying there's no such thing as bias? There's just relativity between things.
I think you're saying you have to be biased.
Yeah.
No, I was saying like, cause I didn't see the icon of who was talking, but it's like we're biased because we can't imagine a world in which potentiality doesn't exist. But there is no world in which potentiality doesn't exist. So you can't be biased about something that doesn't exist. Like that was the point I was making there. Because I think that's
what
like
creates bias? What is bias?
Bias is an opinion from your standpoint, right? That is based on your standpoint. So, and then to say I can give an unbiased account is almost a fallacy because it shouldn't come from your mouth. So, like, an unbiased thing would be just a factual information or a brute fact, where everything else that is opinion-based would be technically biased because it is coming from me, and my qualia or my experience is what.
If you're related to it,
it's delivering the opinion.
So if you're related to it, there's a connection to you and it. You can't really have a separate.
You could be related to a fact.
No,
you could be related to a. You could be related to a fact. So I don't know quite about that, but you're kind of on the same track for sure.
So you get a person that's not connected to something that has no stake in the game, or you get their opinion, and you're saying,
it's like someone,
okay, this guy.
It's like someone telling you, hey, I'm gonna give you an unbiased opinion. It just wouldn't really make sense. You'd be like, well, technically, you're not really. It doesn't really make sense.
So if a guy bet on a game, if a guy put his money behind something, and it's kind of like you're gonna give a unbiased view of one thing or another, you're probably gonna give a more biased view to the thing that you bet on, right? Than
if your experience, like your qualia, right, determines what you're doing, then it's biased. If you're just repeating a fact that is what it is with or without you, then it's unbiased. But your opinion cannot be unbiased because it is based off your experience.
Let's say hypothetically you have a beauty pageant and you bet on it, and you're the judge. You're the judge of it, and you know it's kind of like, well, I'm gonna give an unbiased opinion, and people like, well, you got money on that person that you said won, you know, and you're judging, you're voting for that person, so you're not unbiased in that.
My unbiased opinion would, people think she's hot, but I like her over there. So I mean, is that an unbiased opinion? I don't know.
Well, can you give an unbiased opinion about beauty?
I don't think you can give an unbiased opinion about anything, honestly, at the end of the day.
Or let me rephrase that. Can you make unbiased claims about beauty?
Okay.
Inherently subjective?
Because it depends how you're related to it.
Well, you can say that about, well, I don't know.
If I say like the sun is hot, that's an unbiased opinion. Like everybody would agree with me, right? I'm related to it, but it can be counted, but it's unbiased. I'm like, I'm not biased in this. Everybody fucking feels this way. It's fucking hot.
Temperature is a subjective measurement.
No, I mean like everybody knows like the sun to a human being is fucking hot. Like it's it's 1,000,000 degrees. So right.
I mean,
even though temperature is subjective, there's a threshold where it's like, yeah, that'll burn every fucking human on the planet. So let's agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Sure. If you're connected to something, you have stake in it. You in being connected to it, you can't really give an unbiased opinion because you're gonna say
that's a way that I'm relating. Oh, sorry, Nemec, what's up?
No, yeah, you're just gonna say things a certain way in how it relates to you. Yeah, you're gonna say things in a certain way and how it relates to you and how it will benefit you. Right? Nope.
Yeah, well, yeah, sorry, I'm listening to wifey. She's talking to me.
So, like, you have to know when you're talking with a person how much of their biased opinions are being interjected into it and in having an honest discussion and how much is not sometimes. Because it's not really about finding truth. It's about more pushing the narrative of whatever they're trying to push, maybe religion or whatever.
Well, essentially, the moment you're relating the data point to something else, you're creating bias.
Okay, so
Like
everything has
temperature.
a bias to a certain degree, so you have to be able to separate the unbiasedness
Well,
of
no,
and the biasness and come to a conclusion.
Every subject in reality is individually unbiased, but when you the moment you're relating to something else, you're creating the bias.
Okay, so when you're communicating with a person, you have to separate the biasness and the unbiasedness to certain degrees
You need to separate the fact from the experience of the fact.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about interacting with people.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, you can't avoid bias.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You factor it in.
Like even within fact, like even if they're talking about facts, you can't remove the bias because they could be talking about 1,000,000 different facts, but they chose that one fact, and so you have to ask why that fact, and they have all sorts of bias or considerations as to why they chose that fact, and so in that sense. You're never going to escape bias. You're never going to get away from subjectivity.
But there's some degrees of them being unbiased about things, and you know, in some cases, and bias in others. You're just gonna have to have an understanding to what degree they are biased.
Well, do you think you can offer an objective perspective? Is that possible?
Okay. You're you if something has the same stake, if you have the same stake in something that another person has, you're talking about, then there's no really unbiasedness there. So if you relate to the same thing the same way that other person does, then it you're more on the same page
It just means you have the same bias.
yeah, which is better than not having it, because you'll be more in a position of opposing.
No, opposition is not always bad.
Yeah, what does that have to do with being better, though?
Well, no, I'm just saying,
because...
like, if you're on the same page and you're both biased to the same things, that doesn't eliminate unbiasedness, but you're both you're on the same page and you're for the bias of it. So
yeah, but I think Zerk asked you is like, could something be unbiased, right? I thought it might have been wrong. Yeah. So he's asking you, do you think that there are things that could be unbiased, like us understanding 2 + 2 = 4? This is a system laid out. Everybody understands that. We know that. That's unbiased. There's no biased opinion going into this notion of 2 + 2 = 4.
Well, that's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from on people on people being on the same page and people not being on the same page and communicating with each other.
But that wasn't what was asked, though.
That's fine though, because he took it in an interesting direction. So.
Because I get your point with, like, interpersonal interactions. There's gonna be that, but obviously there are certain things that are not biased. It's like bias doesn't reign supreme over all of existence or all of humanity.
There's some levels of unbiased and there's some levels of bias in how people relate to each other. Like if two people have a certain understanding and being biased on those certain two things, so they're on the same page. They might have their differences in others, but that's the
No, we'll see. So here's the thing. You're getting into, like, sort of weird space, because two people could look outside and go outside and they see, hey, it's raining. One person, the bias comes in where one person's like, oh man, I hate it when it rains, and the other person's like, oh, I love it when it rains. But you know what is objective that both of those people are experiencing is that it's raining. So if all of a sudden, like, somebody says, "Oh no, it's a sunny day right now," while it's raining for the other person, yeah, that's taking it to another level. But just the fact that people can experience that it's raining outside, that is unbiased information. That is just an objective truth. But how people feel about that's when bias comes in.
Well, I don't know. I think
I'm talking about communication.
Stating the fact that it's raining is a bias action, because you would only state that fact with a motivation, and the moment you have a motivation, you're biased.
No, but you didn't have to state that fact. You didn't have to state that fact. Somebody could just be like, oh, I like it when it's raining outside, and the other person says, I don't like it when it's raining outside. Obviously, you're both tying into this objective truth that it is raining outside. So that's why I'm saying that's why there's no bias in that portion of the in those statements. Do you see what I mean?
But there's bias in the fact that they selected that truth claim out of every other truth claim, because they could have said, "Oh, I like the way that the wind goes through those trees," or "The grass is quite lovely today. I like the way you cut it. Or those are conifer trees over there. I quite
Yeah,
like those. There's a
yeah,
million different observations.
but
They're
those
all
aren't truth
objective.
claims.
So, well,
Those aren't truth
sorry,
claims though.
I wasn't very specific in what I said. You could say
Okay,
those
okay.
are conifer trees over there, or you could say that grass is 2 centimeters off the dirt, or that road goes to Kansas, or that car is a Ford. And you
Yes.
can go
Yeah.
on and on and on like that.
Yes.
What I'm asking is how people can relate to each other and communicating, and how you go about doing that. And I was saying, like, well, if you get two people on the same page on being biased, having the same biases, in what they relate to, then they could more communicate across to each other. But those who don't, their communication will break down because one person is talking along a different frame of bias compared to the other person that they're communicating with, and they're not. So it's kind of like they're warped. They're having a warped view. It's only when you take that warped view out of the equation and they're both on the same page on having connection to the same thing that they're biased towards. Now they can more have um
Well, they can.
a frank conversation.
Yeah, because I can even tie that into what I was saying. Because you can have two people making objective claims, but if the claims are incompatible, and it doesn't matter that they're objective, like they have to be on the same page.
No, but
view.
That's the exact point of what objectivity is, though. Objectivity is the things that we can all agree on, that this is how it is. Like we all agree, like when you say a specific word, that means that word's like when I say I feel or I see something or whatever it is. Like everybody out has a general understanding of what that word is, and that's where, like, to try and say everything is subjective, then there would be no meanings to words. Everybody would have different meanings to words. A cat could mean the sun. Like there has to be a certain amount of objective fundamental
Scott, what I'm saying,
fundamentals to even be able to have a subjective point of view.
I
Do
understand what
you
you're
see what I'm
saying,
saying?
but with a warped lens view and how people psychologically are, when you communicate with them, they are acting off of a frame of their biases, and you when it's so it's kind of like you're not really
So
you're not
basically,
really
you're just arguing is that people have opinions. Is that, I mean, is that your people have opinions? I mean, that's not, I don't know why we're.
I'm talking about communicating, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like basically you're just saying
And
people have
having frank
opinions.
opinions,
Yeah,
and having frank
but
communication.
even having opinions and having different opinions doesn't mean you can't have frank communication. Like, so I guess I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from. That's why I'm sort of probing you with these
If
questions,
one
because I don't
person ain't
understand.
relating to what you relate to and having a bias, then when you communicate with each other, you're not going to you're going to be you're not going to